There's a sofa in a living room in a house you've never been to, and you know exactly what it looks like. That's the thing about this show. Most people don't have a favorite episode so much as they have a room they were sitting in when it was on. A carpet, a particular light, someone in the kitchen. So here's what this is. It's a few hours of Simpsons history, town geography, production trivia, voice booth stories, and general lore, laid out in chunks that don't build to anything. There's no big reveal at the end. Nothing is being saved for later. If you drift off in 20 minutes, you haven't missed a payoff because there isn't one. That's sort of the point. If you like this kind of thing, subscribing helps. That's it, and I won't mention it again, right? Let's start where it actually started, which is a bloke sitting in a waiting room, quietly panicking with a pencil. Picture a man in a lobby. It's 1987, he's in his early 30s, he's been called in to pitch something, and he's just realized, sitting there on the sofa, waiting to be shown in, that the thing he came to pitch is a terrible idea. Not artistically, legally, and he's got maybe 15 minutes to come up with something else. That's Matt groaning, and the something else is the reason you're listening to this. Let me back it up a bit, because the context makes it better. Groening grew up in Portland, Oregon, and by the mid-'80s, he'd been drawing a weekly comic strip called Life in Hell for about 5 years. He had started it back in 1977 as a self-published thing, basically a way of explaining Los Angeles to his friends back home. It was a one-eared rabbit called Binky, and later a couple of blokes in fezzies called Akbar and Jeff, and it was, by all accounts, entirely his. He described it once as Matt groaning, pure and simple, which I think is a lovely way of putting it. Some weeks it was funny, some weeks it was just whatever mood he happened to be in, and it ran in alternative weeklies and picked up a following the way those things did back then, slowly and among a particular sort of person. One of those people was James L. Brooks. Now, Brooks is a genuinely enormous figure. Mary Tyler Moore, Taxi, terms of endearment. He wasn't some junior producer taking a punt. He was working on the Tracy Ullman Show, which was going to be one of the first primetime series on the brand new Fox network. And Fox at that point was barely a network at all. It was 2 nights of programming and a lot of optimism. Brooks wanted little animated bits to go before and after the ad breaks. Bumpers, essentially. Something with a bit of personality to stop the whole thing feeling like a variety show from 1962. He'd seen Life in Hell, he liked it, so he rang Groening and asked him to come in and pitch some animated shorts. And Groening, understandably, thought, right, brilliant, I'll animate Life in Hell. Then he got to the lobby and did the maths. Here's the bit that always gets me. The reason he changed his mind wasn't creative cowardice or sudden burst of inspiration. It was rights. Animating Life in Hell would have meant signing away the publication rights to the thing he'd been building for a decade. His life's work handed over to a television company in exchange for a few one-minute cartoons between sketches on a variety show that might not last a season. He worked out, sitting there, that it wasn't worth it. So he grabbed a pencil and sketched out a family instead. And because he had roughly no time and needed names immediately, he used his own. His father was Homer, his mother was Margaret, Marge. He has sisters called Lisa and Maggie, which means that in the space of about 10 minutes in a waiting room, a man committed his entire immediate family to television immortality without asking any of them first. I've thought about this a lot, and I genuinely can't decide whether it's the sweetest or the rudest thing a person could do. The son was the exception. Groening has said he considered calling him Matt since the character was essentially him, the bookish kid who got in trouble for drawing in class, but he didn't think it'd land in a pitch meeting. Bit on the nose, so he went with Bart, which is an anagram of brat. He's also said in a separate interview that part of the appeal was that it sounds a bit like bark, and there's something inherently funny about a father shouting it across a house. Both explanations are probably true. Anagram for the press, bark for the ear. The first short went out on the 19th of April, 1987. It was called Good Night, and it ran a shade under 2 minutes. Homer and Marge tuck the kids in, and every reassuring thing they say makes the situation worse. Homer tries to explain that dreams are just your brain sorting things out and ends up terrifying everyone, including himself. It is, structurally, a Simpsons episode. It's just very small and quite ugly. And the shorts kept going for 3 seasons of Ullman right through to the 14th of May, 1989, ending with one called TV Simpsons. In the first couple of years, they were often split into 3 or 4 parts across an episode. By the 3rd year, they'd become single self-contained stories, which tells you something about how quickly the format was firming up. They were animated at Klasky Supo, the same outfit that later did Rugrats, by a small team including Wes Archer, David Silverman, and Bill Kopp. Later on, it was mostly Silverman and Archer, and I want to be honest here because there's a version of this story where everyone pretends the shorts were secretly brilliant all along. They're rough, really rough. The character designs are harsher and looser than what you know. The bodies distort in ways that the show's official style guide has forbidden for about 30 years now. Homer's face does things Homer's face is not allowed to do. The colors are flat, the line work wobbles, and the voices haven't arrived yet. Dan Castellaneta's Homer is a strained Walter Matthau impression that sounds like a man doing a bit rather than a man being a person, which at that stage it was. But my honest opinion, and I'll defend it, is that this is the best thing about them. There is something genuinely lovely about watching a thing that became a monument while it's still just a bloke's drawings. No merchandising, no legacy, no 36 years of people arguing about which season it stopped being good. Just a small yellow family with too many teeth being weird for 90 seconds between sketches. A quick fun detail on the casting, and then I'll leave the voice stuff alone because there's a whole chunk on it later. Castellaneta and Julie Kavner were already on the Tracy Ullman Show, not as voice actors, as actual on-camera cast members doing live-action sketches. When the shorts needed voices, the producers looked around, saw 2 perfectly good performers already on the payroll, and decided that was cheaper than hiring anyone. Homer and Marge exist in the form they do because someone was being thrifty. Now, the shorts were popular in the way that a running gag on a variety show is popular. People liked them. Fox noticed. And there's a marketing statistic from around that time that I find quite funny, which is that only about 14% of Americans were aware of the shorts at all. By November 1990, so 11 months after the proper series launched, that figure was somewhere around 85% for the family itself, 14 to 85. That is the entire 80s to 90s transition in 2 numbers. Now, on the subject of how the shorts turned into the actual show, there's a 3rd name that doesn't get said enough, and I want to say it properly: Sam Simon. The creator credit on The Simpsons is 3 people: Groening, Brooks, Simon. Groening is famous, Brooks is famous. Simon is, to most casual viewers, a name that scrolls past. And that's a bit unfair, because a fairly consistent line from people who were in the room is that Simon was the one who built the writer's room, who worked out what a Simpsons script actually was, how the jokes should be constructed, how to turn a 1-minute gag about a dysfunctional family into a 22-minute story with an emotional shape to it. He hired writers. He set standards. He was, by several accounts, extremely good at it, and not always easy to be around, which is a combination that shows up in comedy more often than people admit. He left after season 4, he kept a credit and a share of the money for the rest of his life, and famously gave enormous amounts of it away before he died in 2015. And the show he helped build has now outlived him by a decade and counting. There's an argument about exactly how much of the show is his, and I'm not going to try to settle it, because the people who were actually there don't agree, and I wasn't. But if you've ever wondered why the early seasons feel so much more constructed than the shorts do, why they have second acts and consequences, a decent chunk of that answer is Sam Simon. Right, so, the series. Fox commissioned a half-hour show, which was a genuinely mad decision. There had not been a successful primetime animated sitcom for adults in America since The Flintstones, and that had ended in 1966, 23 years earlier. The received wisdom was that animation was for Saturday mornings and children, and that adults would not sit down at 8 o'clock on a Sunday to watch a cartoon. The intended first episode was one called Some Enchanted Evening, the one where Homer and Marge go out for a night and the babysitter turns out to be a wanted criminal. It was meant to launch the series. Then the animation came back from the studio and it was, by all accounts, a disaster. Unusable, faces off model, timing wrong, the lot. There's a well-worn anecdote about the production team watching it and going quiet, so they scrambled, pulled a different episode forward, and the show launched on the 17th of December, 1989, with Simpsons roasting on an open fire, which is the Christmas one. Homer doesn't get his bonus. Marge spends the Christmas money on removing Bart's tattoo. Homer takes a job as a shopping center Santa, loses the lot at the dog track, and comes home with a greyhound. And that, I'd argue, is a much better first episode anyway. Some Enchanted Evening is a decent farce. Roasting on an Open Fire is a story about a man who cannot afford Christmas for his family and is too ashamed to tell his wife. It establishes in 22 minutes that this show is going to be funny and also that it is going to mean it. The greyhound is Santa's little helper, incidentally, so the dog has been there since Minute 1. One last bit of housekeeping on the Ullman era, because it has a strange legal footnote. Tracy Ullman sued. Her position was that her show was the thing that made The Simpsons work, that they were a segment on her program. They got their audience through her program, and she was therefore owed a slice of what became one of the most profitable properties in television. The courts disagreed and ruled for the network. I have no strong feelings about the legal merits, but I do think there's something quietly brutal about it. She had the most successful thing in the history of Fox running inside her show for 3 years as filler and got nothing from it. That's a hard one to sit with. And here's a fun detail to finish on, because it's my favorite bit of prehistory and almost nobody knows it. In 1969, 20 years before any of this, Groening's father, the actual Homer Groening, made a short film. He was a filmmaker and cartoonist himself. The short was called The Story, and it starred his children, Maggie, Lisa, and Matt. So before there was a Simpsons, there was a bloke called Homer pointing a camera at his kids called Maggie and Lisa and Matt in Portland in the 60s. The show didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a specific house, which is as good a way as any to start talking about the house. 742 Evergreen Terrace. That's the address, and it's one of those pieces of information that a surprising number of people can produce on demand despite never having consciously learned it. It's in the same mental drawer as your childhood phone number. Here's the thing about that street name, though. Groening grew up on Evergreen Terrace in Portland. Southwest Evergreen Terrace, specifically. He went to Ainsworth Elementary and then Lincoln High, so the fictional family lives at the fictional version of the road he was raised on, which is either a warm tribute or the laziest possible naming decision, and I suspect the answer is both. And it doesn't stop there, not even slightly. If you go to Northwest Portland and walk along 23rd Avenue, you cross a run of streets laid out alphabetically. And on that walk, in a fairly short stretch, you pass Flanders, Kearney, Lovejoy, and Quimby. 4 street signs, 4 characters: Ned Flanders, Kearney Ziswich, the bully with the buzz cut, Reverend Timothy Lovejoy, Mayor Joe Quimby. Elsewhere in the city, you've got Burnside, which gives you Charles Montgomery Burns, and Terwilliger, which gives you Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., better known as Sideshow Bob. Terwilliger is the one I like most because Terwilliger Boulevard in southwest Portland includes the Terwilliger Curves, which are famously one of the more dangerous stretches of road in Oregon. So the most treacherous man in Springfield is named after the most treacherous corner in Portland. I have no evidence that was deliberate. I choose to believe it was. Groening has been fairly open about the whole thing. His explanation, roughly, is that he did it early on because he thought it would be amusing for people in Portland to drive past those alphabetical streets and slowly clock what was happening. That's it. That's the entire motivation. A private joke aimed at approximately one city, which then became one of the most decoded pieces of trivia in television. There's an extra layer on Quimby that I enjoy. The character is a Kennedy parody, the accent, the affairs, the vague sense of dynasty, and Quimby and Kennedy do sound a bit alike if you say them quickly. But Quimby Street in Portland has another famous fictional resident, Ramona Quimby, from the Beverly Cleary books, which are also set in Portland. So one street produced a corrupt mayor and a beloved children's book heroine, and I'd very much like to see them meet. But now, let's talk about the state, because for about 23 years, the single most persistent question in the fandom was where Springfield actually is, and the show treated that question the way a cat treats a laser pointer, deliberately, endlessly, and with no intention of ever letting anyone catch it. The jokes are relentless once you start noticing them. Someone begins to say the state and a lorry goes past. A map gets held up and a hand covers it. A newsreader says it and the sound drops out. In the 2007 film, Ned takes Bart up a hill and points out the 4 states bordering Springfield: Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, which is not a real arrangement of anything. Al Jean, the long-running showrunner, has joked about this, that there's an answer if you just put all the clues together, and when you find that state, you're a true fan. He was obviously taking the mickey. Then in 2012, it appeared to break. Groening did an interview with Smithsonian Magazine, and in it he said plainly that Springfield was named after Springfield, Oregon. His reasoning was actually quite sweet. When he was a kid, the show Father Knows Best was set in a town called Springfield, and he was thrilled by that because he assumed it meant the Springfield next door to Portland. He'd worked out later that it was a made-up name, and that Springfield is one of the most common town names in America. And so when he was building his own show, he thought, this is perfect. Everyone will assume it's their Springfield. His line was, and they do. The internet went absolutely mental. 23 seasons of the show's biggest running gag, apparently resolved in a magazine interview in about 4 sentences. Deadline ran it, ABC ran it, every outlet with a pop culture section ran it. There were people writing genuinely upset blog posts about how this was blasphemy. 2 days later, Groening spoke to TV Guide and said, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly, I never said Springfield was in Oregon. I said Springfield was the name of my sled, which is one of the funniest things a creator has ever said to a journalist. And I want to be clear about why it works. It's a Citizen Kane joke. Rosebud, the sled, the meaningless object that everyone builds meaning onto. He's not just denying it, he's telling you that the answer was never going to be an answer, and that you did this to yourself. And crucially, he was technically right. He'd said the town was named after Springfield, Oregon. He never said it was located there, which is a distinction so fine it's basically transparent, and he used it anyway. Then the show got involved. The chalkboard gag on the 15th of April, 2012, the first episode after all this, read, "The true location of Springfield is in any state but yours." That's the answer. That's the actual, sincere, final answer. It's in whichever state you're not in. I'll say plainly that I think this was handled perfectly. There is a version of this show where they gave you a state in season 9 and it became a piece of settled canon and absolutely nobody cared about it ever again. Instead, there's a joke that ran for a quarter of a century, escalated into an international news cycle, and got resolved with a sled. That's better. That's just better. For the record, and only for the record, one of the more famous supposed reveals came at the end of Behind the Laughter in season 11, where the narrator states the family live in northern Kentucky. It is a joke inside a mockumentary parody. It is not evidence. Nothing about that episode is evidence of anything. Since we're standing outside the house anyway, let's have a wander around the town because the geography of Springfield is one of the strangest things about it. It has a nuclear power plant which sits on the skyline in the opening credits and is visible from what appears to be everywhere. It has a gorge deep enough to kill a man, and canonically nearly does, twice. It has a monorail for one episode. It has a tire fire that has been burning continuously since roughly the beginning of recorded time. It has a harbor, a ski resort, a desert, farmland, a cliff, a bay, and at various points, its own borders with itself. None of it is consistent. The distance between the house and the plant changes depending on what the joke needs. The school is variously a 5-minute walk and a bus ride away. There's a running acknowledgement in the fandom that Springfield's geography is impossible to map, and people have tried anyway, which is very much the correct response. The landmarks are the load-bearing bits. Moe's Tavern, which has almost never been shown to have more than 5 customers and somehow sustains itself. The Quick E-Mart. Lard Lad Donuts, with the enormous fiberglass mascot out front that has come to life at least once. Springfield Elementary, with its asbestos and its budget crisis and its permanently exhausted staff. The Springfield Retirement Castle, Krustyland, the Android's Dungeon, the escalator that goes up and stops, which killed several people and is still standing, and that last one actually is the perfect example of how the town works. In most sitcoms, a fatal architectural failure would be an episode. In Springfield, it's a background gag that gets referenced years later, still unfixed, because nobody in the town has the institutional capacity to fix anything. But talking a bit about the real-world afterlife of all this, because it's genuinely quite moving. Springfield, Oregon leaned in. In 2007, Groening signed a plaque for the city. The wording was, roughly, "Yo to Springfield, Oregon, the real Springfield," which the city has quite reasonably treated as a trophy ever since. Their community relations people have pointed out that residents knew perfectly well what was going on years before the Smithsonian interview because they had it in writing. Around 2014, the city commissioned a mural painted on the side of the Emerald Art Center. Groening's comment on it was that he planned to sneak up in the middle of the night and sign it, and hoped he wouldn't get arrested. And in Portland, there's a footbridge over Interstate 405 connecting the Northwest and Pearl districts that used to be called Flanders Crossing. In 2021, the city's transport bureau renamed it Ned Flanders Crossing. There's a plaque. It's an official piece of municipal infrastructure named after a cartoon character who was himself named after the street it crosses. That's a loop closing, and I find it genuinely lovely. A bloke names a character after a street sign as a private joke for his home city. And 30-odd years later, the city names the bridge after the character. There's also a 2019 episode called Marge the Lumberjill that's actually set in Portland, and which puts the real street signs on screen, the names that became the characters sitting there in the background where anyone paying attention can see them. It's the show acknowledging the joke without explaining it, which is about the right level. And a small addendum I can't resist. At some point in 2021, an anonymous person installed a sign in Northwest Portland next to a row of beehive-shaped bushes. The sign said, "Merge Simpson." Somebody did that. Somebody made that sign, took it out into the city, and put it next to some hedges. We actually do know who. It was built and put there by nuns. That's the correct relationship for a city to have with a television program, I think. Since we're standing outside the house anyway, and we've walked around the block a couple of times, we might as well talk about the 60 seconds you sit through before every single episode. The thing I keep coming back to about the Simpsons theme is that a man wrote it while driving, which I only learned embarrassingly late in life and have never entirely got over. 3 notes in, a room full of people who weren't paying attention are suddenly paying attention. It's one of maybe 5 pieces of music in the world that does that, and it was worked out somewhere between a meeting and a driveway. In 1989, Groening went to Danny Elfman and asked him to write a theme. Elfman at that point was known mostly for Oingo Boingo, and for scoring Tim Burton films, Pee-wee, Beetlejuice, and Batman was about to come out. He was not an obvious television theme man. Groening showed him a rough cut of the opening sequence, and Elfman's reaction was that it already felt classic, old-fashioned in a deliberate way. So he suggested going retro, writing something that sounded like a big orchestral television theme from the 50s or 60s rather than anything contemporary. Groening agreed on the spot. Elfman has said it seemed like an obvious choice and that Groening was in quick agreement, which is a lovely phrase for what must have been a very short conversation. Then Elfman drove home, worked out the tune on the way, and recorded a demo in his home studio the same day. He's described it as one of the easiest compositions of his career. He's also acknowledged, with what I read as a certain amount of resignation, that it will probably be his most lasting legacy as a composer. And look, the man scored Batman. He scored Edward Scissorhands. He wrote the Spider-Man theme. And the thing he'll be remembered for is a minute of music he sorted out during a commute. Fun detail. Those 3 opening notes at the very top, the vocal ones, that's Elfman himself singing with 2 friends, not a session choir, 3 blokes in a room. There's a technical thing worth mentioning, and I'll keep it brief because I'm not going to sit here and lecture anybody about music theory at 1 in the morning. The theme is built on a scale called the Lydian dominant. In plain terms, it's a major scale with 2 notes shifted, 1 up and 1 down, and the effect is that it sounds bright and cheerful and also very slightly wrong. Off-kilter, like a cartoon that's a bit meaner than it looks, which is, if you think about it, exactly the correct musical description of the show. Whether Elfman was thinking about any of that consciously or just wrote what sounded right in the car, I have no idea. Probably the second one. The best stuff usually is. Now, the version you actually have in your head is probably not Elfman's original. The theme got rearranged for season 2. Elfman was brought back in for that. Then in season 3, Alf Clausen produced the arrangement that has essentially been the theme ever since. Fuller, punchier, better balanced. From season 5, it got remastered again with quieter tremolo strings at the very start, so when you hum it, you're humming Elfman's tune through Clausen's orchestration, which is a fairly standard arrangement in music and a fairly unusual one in the public imagination, because almost nobody knows Clausen's name and everybody knows the tune. We'll come back to him properly later because his story deserves more than a footnote here. Now, the visuals. The opening sequence is one of the most repeated pieces of film in the history of the medium, and it contains 2 slots that change every week. That's a genuinely mad production decision, and I want to spend a minute on why. The chalkboard gag comes first. Bart, after school, writing a line over and over. It's a punishment format. And the joke is that the line is always something specific and usually something Bart would absolutely deserve to be punished for. Then there's the couch gag at the end. The family runs into the living room and something goes wrong. The first couch gag turned up in Bart the Genius, production code 7G02, the second episode made. And there's a first-hand account of this from Chris Ledesma, who was the show's music editor for decades. He remembered seeing that first couch gag and thinking it was clever and funny, but not knowing what the plan was. Then he went in for the music spotting session on the next episode, Homer's Odyssey, and noticed there was a different gag in the main title. So he asked Groening and Sam Simon directly, "Are you doing a new one of these every week?" They said yes. And Ledesma's reaction, in his own account, was amazement. That on top of everything else involved in producing a weekly animated series, they were going to put fresh content into the title sequence every single week, plus a new chalkboard line every week. Nobody asked them to do this. Nobody would have complained. Most other shows in the history of television have one title sequence and run it until the end. The audience has zero expectation of novelty in a title sequence. It is, by a distance, the least necessary thing you could choose to spend animation hours on. They did it anyway, for decades. In practice, the ratio settled at roughly 2/3 new and 1/3 recycled per season, which is still an absurd amount of bespoke animation for something most people fast forward. And then it got stranger because at some point they started handing the couch gag to guests. Bill Plimpton, the independent animator, did several. There's one of his where the joke is that Homer had a romantic history with the couch, and that there's a love child couch he has to acknowledge. That's a real thing that aired on network television as part of a title sequence. John Kricfalusi of Ren and Stimpy did one. Guillermo del Toro did an extended horror cinema homage that runs longer than some short films. Sivane Chomet did one, and Banksy did one in 2010 that turned into a grim satirical sequence about overseas animation labor, which reportedly caused a certain amount of internal discomfort, and which the show ran anyway. I think that's the bit that impresses me most, actually. Not that they had the idea, but that they kept having it for 36 years, and that they were willing to let outsiders come in and use the most recognizable 10 seconds the show owns to do something the show wouldn't have done itself. Since we're on the topic of the opening, a few small things I like. The sequence itself is a piece of geography. It flies through the town, the sign, the school, the plant, the shops, and it's essentially the only consistent map of Springfield that exists, which is funny given everything I said earlier about the town's layout being impossible. Maggie gets scanned at the checkout. In the original version, the till reads a specific price, and there was a long-running fan belief about what that number meant in terms of the cost of raising a child. It was, as far as anyone has established, a reference to the estimated monthly cost of raising a baby in 1989. Lisa gets thrown out of band practice for playing a solo that has nothing to do with what everyone else is doing, which is possibly the most efficient character introduction ever animated. You learn her entire personality in 4 seconds of saxophone. Homer drops a glowing fuel rod out of his collar and abandons it in the road, which establishes his professional competence and the town's regulatory environment simultaneously. And Marge has Maggie in the shopping trolley, and then Maggie is somehow driving the car, which nobody has ever explained and nobody should. The whole thing got rebuilt for season 20 when the show moved to high definition and widescreen. New sequence, more detail, more background characters, a longer flight through the town. It's genuinely nicer to look at. It's also, and I say this as someone who understands exactly why they had to do it, not the one in my head. The one in my head is the 4x3 one with the slightly muddy colors, and it always will be. And that's a me problem rather than a show problem. Here's a fun detail to close on. The saxophone solo has been played by different musicians over the years, but for a very long stretch it was Dan Higgins. And the couch gag has been recycled, parodied, extended, turned into a Harlem Shake bit that had to be rewritten from scratch because the original track couldn't be licensed, and once ran so long that it essentially became the episode. 75 seconds, rebuilt regularly, not weekly. For most of the time I've been alive. And that brings us to the people making all those noises. Dan Castellaneta lowers his chin to his chest. That's it. That's the physical mechanism. To do Homer, he drops his chin down towards his sternum, which changes the shape of everything, and then, in the phrase he and everyone around him uses, he lets his IQ go. I love that description because it's not a technique note, it's a character note. He's not describing a vocal placement, he's describing a decision to stop being clever. The voice didn't start there, though. It started as Walter Matthau. When the shorts were being recorded, Castellaneta pitched Homer as a loose Matthau impression, that gravelly, put-upon, permanently inconvenient sound. And you can hear it in the Ullman material. It works, sort of. But it fell apart for 2 reasons, both of which are boringly practical, and both of which I find fascinating. First, he couldn't get enough power behind it. The Matthau voice sits in a place that's hard to shout from, and Homer needs to shout constantly. Second, and more importantly, he couldn't sustain it. Recording sessions on the half-hour show ran 9-10 hours. Nobody can hold someone else's larynx for 10 hours, so he dropped it down. Found something easier, something with more range in it, something he could be angry and delighted and heartbroken in without wrecking his throat. That process started between the shorts and season 1 and continued across seasons 2 and 3, which is why early Homer sounds like a slightly different bloke to the one you know. He's also said in an interview years later that the final voice is partly his own father's, which recontextualizes the whole thing, doesn't it? The character named after Groening's dad, voiced partly like Castellaneta's dad. A couple of quick Castellaneta facts because he's the most prolific person in the building and it gets overlooked. The doe doesn't exist in the scripts. It has never existed in the scripts. It appears on the page, always, as annoyed grunt, in brackets. The most famous vocal tick in television is a stage direction that one man interpreted the same way several thousand times. He also plays Grandpa, Krusty, Groundskeeper Willie, Barney, Mayor Quimby, Sideshow Mel, Hans Moleman, Itchy, Gil, and Santa's Little Helper. So in a scene where Homer is at Moe's talking to Barney while Krusty is on the telly and the dog is under the table, that is one man having a conversation with himself 4 ways. Outside the show, he was Grandpa in Hey Arnold, and he took over the genie in the Aladdin follow-ups after Robin Williams fell out with Disney, and then handed it straight back when they made up. Which is a class act, frankly, and my favorite bit. He said he's almost never recognized in public except occasionally by a serious fan. His speaking voice sounds nothing like Homer. He can walk around entirely undisturbed, being the most heard man in America. But now let's talk about the swap, because it's the best story in the cast. Nancy Cartwright went in to audition for Lisa. She read the material, looked at the character breakdowns, and decided she wasn't interested in Lisa. Lisa at that stage was written as the middle child, the one without much of a hook. Bart was the one with the energy. So she asked whether she could read for Bart instead, which is a genuinely bold thing to do in an audition room, and she got him. Meanwhile, Yeardley Smith also auditioned for Bart and was told her voice was too high for the part. She got Lisa, so the two of them effectively traded in opposite directions in the same casting process, and both ended up in the role they're now inseparable from. Smith has talked about her voice being mocked when she was younger, that distinctive quality that made her stand out at school in a way she didn't enjoy, and it turned out to be the thing that gave her a 40-year career. Cartwright also plays Nelson, Ralph, Todd Flanders, Kearney, and Database, which means Bart gets bullied by Nelson in a voice provided by the same person, and I've never quite got over that. Julie Kavner had a career before any of this. She won an Emmy for playing Brenda and Rhoda in the 70s, so by the time she turned up on Ullman, she was an established, awarded actor, Marge plus Patty and Selma, plus the entire Raspy Bouvier apparatus. And she's kept a genuinely impressive distance from the whole circus. Her contract reportedly means she doesn't have to do on-camera promotion for the show, which after nearly 4 decades strikes me as one of the wiser negotiations in Hollywood. Harry Shearer does Burns and Smithers, which means the show's central power relationship is also one man talking to himself. He also does Ned Flanders, Kent Brockman, Principal Skinner, Reverend Lovejoy, Otto, Rainier Wolfcastle, Jasper, and for a long time, Dr. Hibbert. Shearer's the one with the outside life, Spinal Tap, radio, the satirical work, and he's historically been the least sentimental about the show in interviews, which I find quite refreshing in a cast that spent decades being asked to be delighted on cue. Hank Azaria arrived a bit later and became the utility player, Moe, Chief Wiggum, comic book guy, Professor Frink, Snake, Bumblebee Man, Cletus, Carl, Apu, Superintendent Chalmers. Azaria's talked about how a lot of these came from doing impressions of people he knew or of other actors. Wiggum started as Edward G. Robinson. Moe came out of an Al Pacino thing. Chalmers is basically a bloke from his old neighborhood. Since we're on the topic of the cast as a group, there's the money. I'll keep this calm because it tends to get reported as drama, and it's really just labor negotiation over a very long period. In 1998, the cast threatened to strike over pay, and it was resolved with increases. In 2004, they stopped doing table reads, and the outcome was a substantial rise, around $250,000 an episode. In 2011, Fox went public with the position that the show would be canceled unless costs came down by something like 45%, and the cast took a significant reduction to keep it going. In 2015, Harry Shearer briefly announced he was leaving before a new deal was reached. That's 4 decades of a small group of people repeatedly having to argue about the value of work that generated a merchandising empire. My view, for what it's worth, is that 6 people producing several $1 billion of value with their throats have a fairly strong hand, and the fact that they had to keep making the case is more interesting than the numbers. On to the harder stuff, because a show that runs this long becomes a record of people leaving. Phil Hartman died in 1998. He played Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz, 2 of the most beloved recurring characters the show ever produced. And the decision was made not to recast either of them. They were retired, quietly. No episode about it, no in-universe explanation, no send-off. They simply stopped appearing. I think that was the right call. And I also think it's a strange kind of grief because it means the characters aren't dead in the world of the show. They're just not there anymore. Somewhere in Springfield, Troy McClure is presumably still hosting things. Marcia Wallace, who played Edna Krabappel, died in 2013. Same decision, the character was retired rather than recast in season 25. And the show gave her a small on-screen acknowledgement with a chalkboard that read, "We'll really miss you, Mrs. K." Doris Grau, the original lunch lady Doris, died in 1995, and the character was largely retired for years before eventually being brought back with a different performer. In 2020, the show announced it would no longer have white actors voice non-white characters. Apu, Carl, Dr. Hibbert, and others were recast or retired. Hibbert went to Kevin Michael Richardson in season 32. There was a long public conversation around Apu specifically that I'm not going to relitigate at 1 a.m, except to say that Azaria himself came to the position that he shouldn't be playing the part and stepped away from it. And then there's Alf Clausen. I mentioned him earlier for the theme arrangement. Here's the fuller picture. From season 2 onwards, he was the show's composer, and he stayed for 27 years, scoring or orchestrating music for close to 600 episodes. He conducted a 35-piece orchestra on a television cartoon every week for nearly 3 decades. He won 2 Emmys for original music and lyrics in 1997 and 1998, and was nominated more than 20 times. 5 Annie Awards. In 2017, he was fired as a cost-cutting measure. The music went to Bleeding Fingers, the company Hans Zimmer co-founded. Clausen was credited as composer emeritus for a while. He sued, and the case was eventually settled or dismissed depending on which account you read. He died on the 29th of May, 2025, at 84. I don't have a clever line for that one. The man wrote the music for a generation's childhood at a scale and standard that nobody was asking for, and got let go over a budget line. Here's a fun detail to end on, and it's a nicer one. Castellaneta likes to stay in character between takes. He'll hold Homer through a session, visualize the scene in his head so the voice comes out right for the moment rather than the line. And he's the only member of the main cast to have written more than 1 episode of the show, several. With his wife Deb LaCosta, so there's a man who spends 9 hours a day being someone who is famously not clever, and then goes home and writes the thing. But now, let's talk a little about the 5 people they're actually playing. Let's start with the one who doesn't talk. Maggie Simpson has been on television since April 1987. She has in that time said almost nothing. A word here and there in a dream sequence or a flash forward. One famous line at the end of an early episode, and otherwise, a pacifier and a look. And she is, by a comfortable margin, the most decorated member of the family. Here's how that happened. In 2012, the show made a theatrical short called The Longest Daycare. 5 minutes, no dialogue. Maggie at a child care center where she's been sorted into the nothing special group, trying to protect a caterpillar from a baby with a mallet. It's screened in cinemas in front of Ice Age, Continental Drift. It was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. That was the franchise's first Oscar nomination, not for any of the 800 episodes, not for the film. For 5 silent minutes of the baby. Then, in 2020, they did it again with Playdate with Destiny, which ran before Onward and later went up on Disney Plus in April of that year. Maggie meets another baby at the park. That's the plot. That's the whole plot. And it works completely because the character has 30-odd years of accumulated meaning attached to a facial expression. Her full name, incidentally, is Margaret. She's named for her mother, which is a detail the show almost never uses. And her voice history is genuinely absurd. Nancy Cartwright did the early pacifier work, and she's kept doing it ever since. Groaning himself did the sucking noise for a while. But when Maggie has actually needed to speak, the show has brought in some extraordinary people to do it. Elizabeth Taylor delivered her first word in Lisa's first word, one word, and they hired Elizabeth Taylor for it, and reportedly did multiple takes. James Earl Jones did her in a Treehouse segment. Carol Kane, Jodie Foster, and more recently Viola Davis have all had a go. So the character with the least dialogue has the most impressive voice cast in the show. I think that's very funny, and I think it's also slightly the point. When she does speak, it has to land, so they buy the best. Right? Homer. I want to approach Homer as a design problem rather than a personality because I think that's more interesting and everyone already knows the personality. In the shorts, Homer's basically a bad-tempered father. He's the obstacle. He shouts, he fails, the kids run rings around him. In the first couple of seasons of the proper show, he's still largely that, a working man who's tired and frustrated and out of his depth, but recognizably a dad from a slightly grubbier sitcom. Then 2 things shifted at once. The voice found its range, as we covered, and the writing worked out that the show was funnier if Homer wanted things. That's the change. Early Homer reacts. Later Homer wants. He wants a job at a bowling alley, a snowplow business, to be in space, to eat the biggest sandwich, to be worshipped by a small religious movement he's accidentally started. And once a character wants things, you can build stories on him indefinitely, which is exactly what they did. Season 12 gave the show's own joke explanation for how he ended up the way he is. In an episode called IOMR, a crayon is discovered lodged in his brain, having gone up his nose as a child. Remove it, and his IQ jumps by dozens of points. He becomes thoughtful, articulate, capable, and miserable, and alienated from everyone he loves, because being clever in Springfield is a lonely business. So he has it put back. I have complicated feelings about that episode. It's very good. It's also the show handing itself a permanent get-out clause for any future stupidity, and they've leaned on it. But the ending, the note he writes to Lisa before he goes back to being himself and her reading it, is one of the small number of moments where the show has genuinely got me, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Marge now. And I'd like to talk about Marge through the hair because it's the thing everyone knows and nobody thinks about. It's a tower. It's roughly the height of her body. It has been through several origin gags. There was a stretch where the joke was that it hid things, and an early design idea, never used, that it was concealing rabbit ears left over from Life in Hell, which I don't believe for a second and enjoy enormously. But here's the thing about Marge that the hair distracts from. She is the only person in that house who chose to be there. Homer got the job and the house and the life through a sequence of accidents and one very good decision. The children were born into it. Marge is the one who looked at a specific man in full knowledge of what he was and decided. That decision is the engine of an enormous number of episodes. Every time the show wants to hurt you, it does it by having Marge quietly reconsider. The novel she writes in season 15. The year she spends nearly doing things. The recurring, almost never spoken suggestion that she is a person of considerable capability who has directed nearly all of it inward at a household that mostly doesn't notice. Kavanagh plays that with a voice that sounds like it's been used a great deal, which is the correct instrument. On to Bart, and I want to come at him sideways through the merchandise, because the merchandise came first. For about 2 years around 1990, Bart Simpson was the most famous person in America who did not exist. Bartmania, t-shirts, posters, dolls, the lot. Underachiever and proud of it. Don't have a cow, man. Eat my shorts. School districts banned the shirts, which of course made everything worse and sold more shirts. And then there were the bootlegs, the unlicensed black Bart shirts that flooded the market in 1990. Bart redrawn as a black character, sold on street corners, entirely unauthorized and enormously popular. Fox went after them. It became a whole minor cultural episode about ownership and appropriation and who a cartoon belongs to once it's out in the world. Do the Bartmen came out of the same moment on The Simpsons Sing the Blues in December 1990. That album shifted over 2 million copies in America alone. The single went to #1 in several countries, and the open secret, confirmed later, is that Michael Jackson was heavily involved in writing and producing it, uncredited for contractual reasons. So the biggest pop star alive wrote a novelty single for a cartoon boy and didn't put his name on it. The interesting part of Bart's story to me is the bit after that. He was the breakout character of a show that then stopped being about him. By the mid-90s, the center of gravity had shifted to Homer, and Bart became one member of an ensemble rather than the point. And the show knew. Season 5 gave us Bart Gets Famous, in which Bart becomes nationally famous for saying a meaningless catchphrase, "I didn't do it," and is then trapped by it, unable to be anything else, watching the thing he's known for hollow him out. That aired in 1994 at the tail end of the shirts and the singles and the merchandising avalanche. That's the show putting its own commercial situation on screen and being quite rude about it. I don't think enough people notice how sharp that is. Now Lisa. And Lisa gets a different treatment here because Lisa is where the show keeps its continuity. Almost nothing about Springfield sticks. Jobs, money, buildings, relationships, injuries. It all resets. But there's a very short list of permanent changes the show has agreed to honor, and Lisa is responsible for 2 of them. In season 7, in Lisa the Vegetarian, she stops eating meat, and she never starts again. The condition of that, famously, was Paul McCartney. He agreed to guest. Star provided the change was permanent, and the show agreed. And 30 years later, she is still a vegetarian. A guest star's ethical stipulation became one of the most durable pieces of canon in the series. Then, in season 13, in She of Little Faith, she becomes a Buddhist after the church is sold to advertising and something in her gives up. That one also stuck. I find this genuinely remarkable. In a show built on the principle that nothing sticks, an 8-year-old girl has made 2 permanent, considered moral decisions, and the show has respected both for decades. She also gets the future. Lisa's wedding in season 6 flashes forward to her at 23, engaged to a man who is bright and posh and dismissive of her family, and the episode is about whether she has the courage to want where she came from. It won an Emmy. It's about 40% jokes and 60% something else, and it holds up completely. If you want the simplest description of what the show thinks Lisa is, she's the person who notices. That's the character, start to finish. She notices, and nobody around her wants to hear about it, and she says it anyway. And finally, briefly, because they deserve it. Santa's Little Helper and Snowball the Second and Snowball the Fifth, and the whole tangled cat succession that got explained in a rhyme. The dog has been there since the first episode. He was a losing greyhound at a dog track, adopted by a man who had just lost everything he had on him. Which means the family's original act at the very start was taking in something nobody else wanted after it had cost them dearly. That's a hell of a thing to put in the pilot and later mention again. And here's a fun detail about the rest of the town. There are, depending on how you count, somewhere north of 100 named recurring characters in Springfield. That's not a normal number. Most sitcoms run on 6 people in a bar. Springfield has a full civic apparatus, a mayor, a police force, a clergy, a medical profession, a criminal underworld, a school board, a local news operation, and a man whose entire job is to be at the DMV. And the reason that matters is that it changes what kind of program this is. When you got that many people, you can do an episode about literally anyone, which is why the show survived the exhaustion of its main characters. Homer runs out of things to want. The town doesn't. So let's walk around it, not in order and not exhaustively because we'd be here until Thursday. Burns and Smithers first because they're the best double act the show has. Charles Montgomery Burns, named after Burnside Street in Portland, is the owner of the nuclear plant and the closest thing Springfield has to a government. His age is a running joke the show has never resolved and never will. He's been in his 80s, his hundreds, and at one point had his birth certificate reveal something that made everyone stop asking. He remembers events that predate his plausible lifespan. He is functionally immortal, and the show treats this as a punchline rather than a mystery, which I think is correct. He also can't remember Homer's name. Sometimes. Decades of Homer working for him, saving his life multiple times, and Burns still asks who he is. That gag has been running since the 2nd season, and it has never once stopped being funny because it isn't really a memory joke. It's a class joke. Waylon Smithers is his assistant, and Smithers is one of the very few characters the show has genuinely developed over its whole run. For years, his devotion to Burns was played as an open secret. Everybody knew, nobody said, the joke was the not saying. Then in season 27, in the Burns cage, he comes out properly and the show deals with it directly. Both of them, remember, are Harry Shearer. So the central relationship in the show's power structure, the tyrant and the man who loves him, is one bloke alone in a booth. Since we're on the topic of long-running pain, the Flanders household, Ned is named after a street in northeast Portland, which Portland vandals have periodically improved by adding a D to the NE on the sign. He is the most patient man on television, and the show's relationship with him has shifted over the decades from mockery to something closer to respect, which I think tracks with the writers getting older. Maud was killed off in season 11 in Alone Again, Natra Diddley, hit by a barrage of t-shirts at a motor race, of all things, because Homer ducked. That's the joke, and it's an incredibly bleak one. And it changed the character permanently. Ned as a widower is a different proposition to Ned as a happy neighbor. The show could suddenly ask what happens to a man's faith when the thing he believes in doesn't hold up its end, which they did more than once and generally well. The strangest thing ever done with him is A Serious Flanders, a 2-part episode in season 33 that plays as a full crime drama pastiche, the sort of thing you'd get on a prestige cable channel, complete with the pacing and the dread and the credits. Non-canon, obviously. But the fact that in the 33rd year somebody thought, right, let's do a limited series about Ned Flanders and take it completely seriously is exactly the sort of decision that keeps the show alive. Krusty next. Krusty the Clown is, on the surface, the children's entertainer. Underneath, he's the show's engine for everything cynical about the entertainment industry, the merchandising, the tax problems, the contempt for the audience, the burnout. His backstory got built in season 3 in Like Father, Like Clown, which reveals he's the estranged son of a rabbi who disowned him for going into comedy. That's a whole jazz singer plot inside a cartoon, and it's played almost entirely straight. His father, Rabbi Kristofsky, was voiced by Jackie Mason, who won an Emmy for it. Then in season 26, in Clown in the Dumps, the father dies. That was the episode surrounded by a somewhat unhelpful publicity campaign about a major character being killed off, which generated enormous speculation and then landed on a recurring guest character. It's a decent episode carrying an unnecessary amount of hype. But now, the school, Springfield Elementary, is a genuinely brilliant piece of comic construction because it's an institution in permanent collapse staffed by people who have privately given up. The budget is gone. The building is falling down. There's asbestos. The staff room is a fortress. Seymour Skinner is the principal, and Skinner is a Vietnam veteran living with his mother in his 40s, which is a character description that could sit in a drama unchanged. And Skinner is responsible, along with Superintendent Chalmers, for what is now probably the most watched 2 minutes of the entire series, steamed hams. The thing people forget is that Steamed Hams is not an episode, it's a sketch inside an episode. It's one of the vignettes in 22 short films about Springfield from season 7, a 2-minute sequence in which Skinner burns dinner and then attempts to convince his boss that he has purchased fast food from a nearby restaurant and is presenting it as a regional dialect variation of hamburgers. That's it. 2 minutes. Aired in 1996. And it has become, roughly 30 years later, a piece of internet folk architecture. There are thousands of edits, remixes, recuts, versions and other animation styles, versions with the audio replaced, versions where the timing is stretched out over an hour. People who have never seen the show know it. It outlived most of the show's actual episodes as cultural material, and it did it entirely by accident. Edna Krabappel, meanwhile, is my pick for the most quietly devastating character in the whole thing. A teacher who was good once in a school that broke her, laughing at things because the alternative is worse. Her retirement following Marsha Wallace's death left a hole the show has never really filled. Sideshow Bob, since we're near the school. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., voiced by Kelsey Grammer, a Yale-educated aesthete with a Gilbert and Sullivan habit and a compulsion to murder a 10-year-old boy. Introduced as Krusty's put-upon sidekick, framed Krusty for armed robbery, got caught by Bart, and has spent 35 years failing to get even. And the Rakes. This is the thing I most want to tell people about because the origin is so good. In Cape Fear Season 5, Bob steps on a rake. The handle hits him in the face. He groans. Then he does it again. And again. 9 times in a row with no variation and no cutaway. The reason it exists is that the episode came in short. They needed to fill time. So they took a small gag and simply extended it past the point of comedy into irritation and then at the other side into comedy again. That's a padding fix. That's a production problem being solved at the last minute. And it's now the most quoted piece of timing in the show's history, taught as an example of how repetition works. I find that enormously encouraging, honestly. Some of the best things in art are people running out of material. Now Apu, and I'll handle this straight, Apu Nahasapima Patailan ran the quick E-Mart, was introduced as a broad type, and then, unusually, got given one of the fullest backstories in the show, a doctorate in computer science, a thesis, an arranged marriage he came to love, 8 children, a voice in episodes about immigration, citizenship, and belonging that were more thoughtful than the character's origin suggested. He was also a white actor doing an Indian accent, and by the 2010s that had become the subject of a long, public, and often quite painful conversation, particularly after a documentary made the argument at length. Hank Azaria eventually came to the view himself that he shouldn't be playing the part and stepped away from it. The 2020 policy on non-white characters followed. I'm not going to adjudicate that here, at this hour, in this video. What I'll say is that both things are true. The character was a caricature in his construction, and he was also written with genuine affection and given more interior life than most of the town. Those don't cancel out. Right, a quick round, one detail each. because these people have been in the background of your life for years and deserve a nod. Mo Seislak, running a bar that appears to have 4 customers and no discernible income, who has been in and out of every desperate act the show can think of, and is somehow still the one you'd want to talk to at closing time. Chief Wiggum, who Azaria based partly on Edward G. Robinson, and who is a genuinely alarming portrait of what a police force looks like with no oversight whatsoever. Ralph, his son, who says things that have escaped the show entirely and now live independently in the language. Comic book guy, whose actual name, Jeff Albertson, was revealed almost accidentally and who invented a sentence structure that the entire internet now uses. Professor Frink, whose voice is a Jerry Lewis impression, and who is the town's only competent scientist and is ignored constantly. Fat Tony, running an organized crime operation with genuinely excellent manners. Lenny and Carl, who have more screen time than the leads of most sitcoms and almost no interior life whatsoever, and who I think about more than is reasonable. They are simply always there. 2 blokes at the plant, at the bar, at the bowling alley. The show has occasionally gestured at giving them stories and mostly hasn't bothered. And there's something almost realistic about that. Most people you see constantly, you know nothing about. Barney, whose sobriety arc is one of the show's better sustained pieces of writing in which it has periodically forgotten. Otto, Willie, Cletus, the Sea Captain, Disco Stew, Hans Moleman, Bumblebee Man, Duffman, Gil, and Grandpa. Abraham Simpson is the character whose timeline is most comprehensively broken, and it's worth flagging because it's the cleanest example of what we're about to talk about. He fought in the Second World War. He was also at various points a young man in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. He has been every generation's grandfather because the show needs him to be, and the show does not care that these are mutually exclusive, which is a decent moment to talk about the fact that none of these people get any older. Bart is 10, he was 10 in 1989, and he is 10 now. Lisa is 8, and has been 8 for longer than most people listening have been alive. Maggie is 1 and has had at least 4 first birthdays. This is called a floating timeline, and it's not unique to The Simpsons. Plenty of long-running comics and cartoons do it, but The Simpsons has run it for so long and so publicly that it's become one of the show's defining structural features rather than a convenience. The way it actually works in practice is slightly more interesting than just nobody ages. The present is fixed relative to the audience. Whatever year it is out here, that's roughly the year it is in Springfield. The characters have mobile phones now, they had answering machines then. The town has the technology and the politics and the anxieties of whenever the episode was written. But the past slides, that's the important bit. Because the characters stay the same age while the present moves forward, everything behind them has to keep shifting to compensate. Homer and Marge met in high school. In The Way We Was, from season 2, that high school is unmistakably the mid-70s. There's the music, the clothes, the whole texture of it. Later episodes have moved that same courtship into the 90s, and then later still into the 2000s, with the appropriate cultural furniture swapped in. So Homer and Marge have had several distinct youths. Their formative years have been rewritten around them 3 or 4 times, and they've never noticed, because the show is not a continuous story. It's a very long anthology about a fixed set of people. And once you frame it that way, most of the so-called continuity errors stop being errors and start being the format doing its job. On the subject of what does stick, because it's a genuinely strange little list, Maud Flanders is dead. That stayed. Ned is a widower, and the show honors it. Lisa's vegetarianism and her Buddhism, as covered, both held. Apu got married and had 8 children, and neither of those reversed. Milhouse's parents divorced, and the show kept it and mined it for years. Smithers came out and stayed out. Larry the Barfly, one of the silent regulars at Moe's, a man who was in the background for 35 years, died in season 35 in an episode called Cremains of the Day. and the show treated it as an actual death. And that's more or less it. That's the list of things that happened and remained happened. Meanwhile, Homer has held something like 190 different jobs. The house has been destroyed and rebuilt. The family have moved away and come back. Springfield has been bankrupted, evacuated, quarantined, sealed under a dome, and relocated entirely. Bart has been to prison. Homer has been to space. None of it counts. Since we're on the subject of things that didn't count, I should probably mention The Principal and the Pauper, Season 9. The episode reveals that Seymour Skinner is not Seymour Skinner. He's a man called Armin Tamzarian, a street kid from Capital City who served in Vietnam under the real Seymour Skinner, believed his sergeant had died, went to deliver the news to his mother, and through a combination of cowardice and kindness, was mistaken for her son and simply never corrected her. He's been living someone else's life for decades. Then the real Skinner turns up. And the town, after a brief attempt at doing the right thing, decides they preferred the fake one, runs the real one out on a train, and passes a legal resolution that everything goes back to how it was and nobody is ever to mention it again. That last bit is the episode acknowledging what it's just done. The reaction was severe. Groening has been publicly unhappy with it. Various crew members have distanced themselves from it. It's routinely near the top of worst episode lists, and it's often cited as the exact moment the show's approach to continuity changed. And here's where I'll say something mildly unpopular, gently, and then move on. I don't think it's a bad episode. I think it's a bad decision executed well. The writing is sharp, the premise is genuinely interesting, and the ending, where the town legislates a retcon into existence, is a proper joke about the mechanics of the show itself. What it isn't is respectful of the audience's relationship with a character they'd spent 9 years getting to know, and that's a real objection that I don't want to wave away. But if the standard is that the show should never do anything strange with its own canon, then you also lose about 40 of the best things it's ever made. So I hold both. The show's own position, for what it's worth, has been to quietly ignore it. Skinner is Skinner. It has been referenced a handful of times as a joke since. That's all. Now, the other pressure valve for a show that can't move forward, the future episodes. Because the characters can't age in the present, the show periodically fires them forward instead, and these have produced some of its best work. Lisa's Wedding, Season 6, jumps to Lisa at 23. Bart to the Future, Season 11, jumps to Bart at 40, and does the Trump gag we'll come back to. Holidays of Future Past from Season 23 jumps 30 years and finds Bart divorced with 2 boys, Lisa married to Milhouse with a teenage daughter, and Maggie a pregnant rock star who still doesn't speak. Barthood does Bart's whole childhood as a Boyhood parody. None of these are canon, all of them contradict each other, several of them are better than the episodes around them, and I think that's because the writers, freed from having to put everything back at the end, can actually let something happen. Holidays of Future Past in particular is a properly sad piece of television. It's about how families stop being able to talk to each other, and it's set 30 years after a show that's been running for 22 years, which does something odd to your head when you're watching it. My honest take on the whole floating timeline business, and then I'll let it go. I don't find it eerie. There's a whole strand of Simpsons theorizing that treats the non-aging as evidence of something, a coma, a purgatory, radiation, whatever, and I understand the appeal, but I think it misses what's actually good about it. What's actually good about it is that it's a promise. The reason a show like this can run for 36 years is that it's fundamentally saying, this will still be here. The house will be there. The dad will come home from work. The dog will be under the table. You can leave for 15 years, come back, and find it exactly as you left it, which is not something the world offers very often. That's not a horror premise. That's the whole appeal. And it costs something, obviously. It means nobody can grow, nobody can leave, nothing can be resolved, and every emotional breakthrough has to be quietly undone by the following Sunday. It means Marge forgives Homer forever. It means Lisa never gets out. But there's a reason the show that's built like that is the one that's still on. But talking a bit about how any of this actually gets made. A single episode of this show takes about 6 months to make, from the first outline to the thing appearing on your screen, and I find the reason for that genuinely soothing to talk about, so we're going to do it slowly. 6 months for 22 minutes, which means that at any given moment there are a dozen or so episodes in the building at different stages of decomposition. And the people working on the one being animated are 8 months past caring about it because they're now arguing about a different one. I find the process genuinely soothing to describe, so let's go through it slowly. It starts in a room. Someone pitches a premise, usually a sentence. Homer becomes a food critic. Marge joins the police. Bart sells his soul. If the room likes it, it gets broken down into an outline. Acts, beats, roughly where the story turns. Then a writer goes away and produces a script. That writer's name is the one that ends up on screen, and it is, in a very real sense, a polite fiction. Because the script then goes back into the room and gets rewritten by everybody. This is the bit people outside comedy underestimate. The Simpsons writer's room, particularly in the classic era, was a rewrite room. A first draft would go in, and the group would go through it, line by line, replacing jokes, punching up dialogue, restructuring scenes for as long as it took. Sessions ran late, often absurdly late. There are stories from the early 90s of people sleeping in the office and going home only to change clothes. The result is that almost no joke in a classic Simpsons episode has a single author. It's a collective product with an individual credit. Then there's a table read. Cast come in, read the script aloud, and the room finds out what actually works. Things die, things that nobody expected get a laugh. More rewrites follow. Then the recording, which as we covered runs long, 9 or 10 hours, a handful of actors doing dozens of parts. Then the animatic. This is the storyboard, timed and cut together with the recorded dialogue, so you can watch a rough version of the episode as still drawings. And this is where a lot of the final shaping happens, because it's the first point at which anyone can see whether the thing is too long, too slow, or missing a beat. Episodes get cut here, whole scenes disappear. Then layout, which people who've worked on the show describe as the big, slow, expensive step. Layout is where the drawings become the actual composition, camera positions, staging, backgrounds, character placement, the whole visual grammar of every shot. It's enormously time-consuming, and it's the stage that determines whether an episode looks good or looks flat. Then it goes overseas for the in-between animation, the tweening, the coloring, the assembly. And then it comes back, and then there are more rewrites because they will rewrite up to and past the point where the animation exists, replacing lines and reanimating mouths if the joke's worth it. And then Alf Clausen, for 27 years, would sit down and score it. Since we're on the topic of the writers, I want to talk about 2 of them specifically because they're the ones the show's own people talk about. The first is George Meyer. Meyer is almost certainly the most influential person in the show's comic voice and the least visible. He was there from close to the beginning, and his role was less about writing episodes with his name on them and more about being the person in the room who reshaped everything. There's a well-known long profile of him from the late 90s that essentially argued he'd changed the texture of American comedy without most people knowing his name. The specific thing Meyer is credited with is a kind of joke construction, dense, precise, slightly surreal, where the funny bit is a word choice rather than a punchline. If you've ever noticed that Simpsons dialogue has an unusual number of jokes buried in the shape of a sentence rather than at the end of it, that's the house style he had an enormous hand in building. The second is John Swartzwelder, and Swartzwelder is my favorite thing in the entire history of this show. He is the most credited writer in the series. 59 episodes, more than anyone else, and a stack of the ones you'd name if someone asked for the best. The Mr. Plow one, the Monorail one, Rosebud, Homer at the Bat, Whacking Day, the Itchy and Scratchy Land one. Enormous quantities of the show's DNA. And he didn't come in. Swartzwelder famously stopped attending the writer's room. He worked from home, submitted his scripts, and largely stayed out of the collaborative rewrite process that everybody else lived inside. He almost never gave interviews for decades, essentially none, until a single long one in 2021 that read like a man doing a bit and possibly wasn't. And the working method, he wrote in a diner booth, drinking coffee and chain smoking because that's where the writing happened for him. Then many states in America banned smoking in restaurants, so he bought a diner booth, installed it in his house, and carried on. He built the room around the habit rather than change the habit. I think about that constantly. There was something so completely correct about it. The man responsible for a huge proportion of the funniest television ever made solved a problem by purchasing furniture. He also self-publishes novels about a private detective, mostly for his own amusement, and does not appear to care whether anyone reads them. Right, the animation itself. The shorts and the first 3 seasons were done at Klasky Csupo, which is why they look the way they do. That slightly rubbery, aggressive, hand-painted quality with the colors sitting oddly. From season 4 through to around season 27, it was film Roman, and this is where the look you think of as The Simpsons was refined. Cleaner lines, more consistent model sheets, better staging. Since around season 28, it's been in-house at Fox and then 20th Television Animation in Los Angeles. And you can see all of that if you're the sort of person who looks. There's a texture to a Klasky Csupo episode that a film Roman episode doesn't have. The eyes sit differently, the mouths move differently. Nobody outside the industry could tell you why. And everybody who grew up with it can feel it instantly, which is the strangest kind of expertise to have. Throughout all of it, the labor-intensive work, the in-betweens, the tweening, the coloring has gone overseas, principally to ACOM in South Korea, and at times to Rough Draft and others, which is why the Banksy couch gag I mentioned earlier landed the way it did. It was making a point about a real production arrangement on the show that used it in the show's own title sequence. The technical history splits cleanly in 2. Seasons 1 to 13 were traditional cell animation, drawn on paper, traced and painted onto sheets of celluloid, photographed a frame at a time. Actual physical objects, thousands of them per episode. There were digital experiments before the switch, Radioactive Man in Season 7 in 1995, and Tennis the Menace in Season 12. Then from The Great Louse Detective in Season 14, the show went fully to digital ink and paint and never went back. And in Season 20, it went to high definition and widescreen with the new title sequence. That's 3 distinct looks across the run, and it's why the show can feel like 3 or 4 different programs depending where you drop in. Now the money and the scale, briefly. An episode was running at somewhere around $5 million as of figures from 2011, which is an extraordinary amount for a half-hour cartoon and reflects both the animation and the cast. The music, as covered, was a 35-piece orchestra weekly for most of the run, not a synth patch, an orchestra on a television cartoon every single week. It's produced single-camera style, storyboard-driven, no live audience, which is worth saying because a lot of people assume there's laughter recorded somewhere. There never has been. On to the rough patches, because there have been a few. Season 1 nearly didn't happen properly. The animation came back badly enough that the intended premiere was scrapped, as we covered, and there was a genuine crisis about whether the show could be produced at all at that standard. The contract negotiations with the main voice actors cut season 19 down to 20 episodes, and then in March 2020, everything went remote. The whole production, writing, recording, everything moved into people's houses partway through season 31. Actors recording in wardrobes, sessions over video calls, the lot. They didn't miss an episode. I want to sit on that for a second, in a calm way rather than an impressed narrator way. A production pipeline that takes 6 months per episode involves several hundred people across 2 continents and depends on a small group of performers being in the same room shouting at each other. That got picked up and reassembled remotely mid-season in a fortnight without dropping anything. Whatever else you think about the modern era of the show, the machine works. And since we're talking about how they're made, it's worth talking about the ones made differently. In 1996, they made an episode with no plot. 22 Short Films About Springfield is a title parody of a film about Glenn Gould. And the structure is exactly what it says. It's a series of small, loosely interconnected vignettes about people in the town, most of them a minute or two long, connected by their shared setting and recurring threads. Apu goes to a party, Wiggum falls into a sewer, Milhouse hides in the shrubs, Bumblebee Man has a very bad day at home. Skinner fails to cook a proper dinner and serves Chalmers a makeshift sandwich. No A-plot, no B-plot, no resolution. The show simply spends 22 minutes wandering around its own town looking at people. And it's one of the best things it ever did, which tells you something about how strong the world had become by season 7. You could stop telling stories entirely and just point the camera at the place, and it held. That's the thing about the format breakers. They only work because the ordinary version works. You can't do an experimental episode of a show nobody has an established relationship with. So let's go through some of them in no particular order and with no argument attached. Treehouse of Horror is the big one, and it's been running since the 25th of October, 1990, Season 2, Episode 3. 3 unconnected horror segments per episode, non-canon, special credits, everybody dies repeatedly and comes back the following week. As of Season 37, they're up to number 36. The genius of Treehouse of Horror is that it's a permanent license to ignore everything. Characters can be killed, transformed, sent to hell, turned inside out. It's where the show puts its violence, its genuine strangeness, and quite a lot of its best animation. And it produced one of the most technically significant things the show has ever done. In Treehouse of Horror, the 6th, from Season 7 in 1995, there's a segment called Homer Cubed, in which Homer steps behind a bookcase into a third dimension and is rendered in full CGI. In 1995, on television, on a weekly cartoon, that segment was a serious piece of computer animation for its moment, and it holds up better than most things from that era, partly because the joke justifies the roughness. It ends with Homer emerging into live-action Los Angeles, standing outside a shop, entirely lost. Then there's the cliffhanger. Who Shot Mr. Burns is the show's one proper serialized event. Part 1 aired on the 21st of May, 1995, at the end of Season 6. Part 2 aired on the 17th of September, 1995, at the start of Season 7. 4 months of gap, in an era before you could just look it up. Burns steals the school's oil, blots out the sun, and gets shot by a person unknown. Almost the entire town has motive. The show ran a competition. There were phone lines. There was a genuine national guessing game in a way that has essentially stopped being possible. And the answer was Maggie, accidentally. Because Burns tried to take a sweet off a baby and she got hold of the gun. I love this resolution because it is simultaneously a complete cop-out and completely fair. The clues are there. The show played it straight. And the answer is a joke about the fact that the whole town wanted to do it, and the only one who managed was the one who couldn't be charged. Behind the laughter from Season 11 is the mockumentary one. The family presented as real actors playing themselves, with a full VH1 behind the music narration about their rise, their addictions, their falling out, and their reunion. It contains the Northern Kentucky gag I mentioned earlier, which people have been wrongly citing as evidence ever since. Trilogy of Error, Season 12, tells the same day 3 times from 3 points of view, and the timelines interlock properly. It's a genuinely well-engineered piece of writing. Homer loses a thumb, Lisa has a science fair project, Bart is involved with a fireworks operation, and the 3 stories keep passing through each other. Brick Like Me, Season 25, is animated using Lego-style CGI mixed with traditional animation. Most of the episode is animated in Lego style. It's a promotional exercise that turns into something surprisingly sad about a father not wanting his daughter to grow out of the things they share. A Serious Flanders, Season 33, as mentioned, the 2-part crime drama. The Star of the Backstage, also season 33, is a full musical episode with Kristen Bell. Lisa the Boy Scout, season 34, opens as a normal episode and is then interrupted by hackers claiming to have stolen unaired Simpsons footage. And the rest of the episode is fragments of fake deleted scenes. It's chaotic and it's very funny, and it's the show at 34 years old deciding to just do whatever it likes. Shoddy Heat, season 36, does Grandpa's past as film noir. Since we're on the subject of the show doing things it shouldn't, the crossovers. A Star is Burns, season 6, brought in Jay Sherman from The Critic, a show made by some of the same people. Groening publicly objected on the grounds that it was using The Simpsons to promote someone else's program and had his name removed from the credits of that episode, which is a fairly serious move and a rare public row. The Springfield Files, season 8, brought in Mulder and Scully, with David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson voicing Mulder and Scully, investigating an alien in Springfield that turns out to be Mr. Burns wandering about after a medical treatment. It's narrated by Leonard Nimoy. It is, objectively, an absurd amount of guest talent for one episode. Simpsorama Season 26 aired on the 9th of November 2014 and brought the Planet Express crew from Futurama back through time to Springfield. Groening created both, so this one at least kept it in the family. And The Simpsons Guy from September 2014 is technically an episode of Family Guy rather than of this show, an hour-long crossover in which the Griffins turn up in Springfield. Opinions on that one vary considerably, and I'm going to leave it there. But now, the one I'd actually send someone, Homer's Enemy, season 8. The premise is simple and cruel. Frank Grimes is hired at the plant. Grimes had a horrible life, worked since he was a child, studied by correspondence course, earned everything through grinding effort. And he is placed next to Homer Simpson, who has a house, a family, a boat, has been to space, has met presidents, and does not do his job. The episode is about a man who arrives in a comedy and starts applying the rules of reality to it. And it does not go well for him. It's the show pointing out, deliberately and without softening it, that Homer's life is unearned and that anyone measuring it fairly would go mad. Grimes does go mad. And then he dies, and at his funeral the town is barely paying attention and Homer is asleep and gets a laugh. It's the darkest thing the show has ever made, and it's also, structurally, a piece of criticism about itself. I'd send someone that 1 or 22 short films, depending on what mood they were in. Not because they're like the funniest, they aren't, but because between them they show you what the show could actually do when it stopped behaving. And here's a fun detail. The clip shows. There are 5 or 6 of them, so it's come to this, from season 4. Another Simpsons clip show, season 6. The 138th episode spectacular, season 7. All Singing, All Dancing, season 9. Gump Roast, season 13. They're framing devices around old footage, made because the schedule demanded episodes, and the budget or the time wasn't there. They're consistently among the lowest rated episodes in every fan ranking ever compiled. And I have a soft spot for them purely because they're so transparently a show going right. We've got nothing, put the good bits on. The 138th episode spectacular even used some of the original Ullman shorts, which is how a chunk of that material got seen by a wider audience at all. Gump Roast ends with a song listing everything that's happened, and the final line is a joke about how the show will never end. That was 2002, 24 years ago. But talking a bit about the format breaker that comes around every single year, whether anyone asks for it or not. The first one went out on the 25th of October, 1990, and the network was nervous about it. Treehouse of Horror, Season 2, Episode 3. 3 segments, a haunted house that would rather kill itself than live with the family, an alien abduction with Kang and Kodos, and a version of The Raven narrated by James Earl Jones, with Homer as the bereaved man and Bart as the bird. And Fox were sufficiently worried about children watching a cartoon that contained actual horror that they put a warning on the front of it. Marge standing in front of a curtain telling the audience that the following program was scary and that if they had young children, they might want to send them off to bed. Which is, I think, the last time anybody in that building underestimated what the audience could take. The format that got established in that first one has barely changed in 36 years. 3 unconnected segments. None of it counts. Everybody can die. The credits get rewritten with joke names. The writers and directors all get a horrible pun version of their own name, which is a tradition that has produced some absolute stinkers and which they have never once skipped. And the numbering is in Roman numerals, always, which means that somewhere in the last decade, the title cards have got genuinely difficult to read at a glance. Treehouse of Horror, SXXXX. You have to stop and do the sum. Since we're here, and since this is the largest single body of work inside the show, let's actually go through some of it properly. Not all of it. There are around 100 segments, and we'd be here until the sun came up. But the ones worth sitting with. The Shinning is probably the most quoted. Treehouse of Horror, the 5th, Season 6. The family caretake a hotel for Mr. Burns over the winter. Burns cuts off the beer and the television, and Homer goes the way Jack Nicholson went. The reason it works is that it is not a parody in the lazy sense. It's a genuine compression. The whole film, its pacing, its dread, its visual language, done in about 7 minutes and then undercut at exactly the right moments. And it contains a joke I think about most in the whole show, which is Homer wandering the corridors muttering that no TV and no beer make Homer something something, and Marge, from behind a door, suggesting go crazy, and Homer replying, don't mind if I do. That's a joke about a man not being able to complete his own catchphrase of madness. It is doing about 4 things at once and it takes 2 seconds. The same episode has Time and Punishment, where Homer fixes a toaster into a time machine and keeps altering the past by killing prehistoric animals, cycling through increasingly wrong versions of his own family until he lands in one where everything is perfect except that nobody knows what donuts are. And it ends with him deciding that a world where his family eats with long lizard tongues is close enough. And Nightmare Cafeteria, in which the school starts eating the children, which is genuinely one of the meanest things ever animated for a family audience. And ends with groundskeeper Willie taking an axe in the back for the 3rd time in one episode, having been axed in the back in each of the 3 segments. That's a structural gag across an anthology. Someone sat in a room and decided that the running joke of this episode would be the same man dying the same way 3 times in 3 unconnected realities. Treehouse of Horror, the 6th, from Season 7, is the one with Homer Cube that I mentioned earlier, the computer animated segment, in 1995 that ends with him walking out into live-action Los Angeles. But the same episode also has Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores, in which the town's advertising mascots come to life and rampage, and the solution turns out to be that they draw their power from attention, so if everybody simply stops looking at them, they die. There's a song about it. The townspeople are in it, singing the instructions. That's a joke about advertising that has aged so aggressively well, it's almost uncomfortable to watch now. Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace, in the same one, gives groundskeeper Willie a Freddy Krueger role, burned to death by the parents' committee after a boiler accident, coming back through the children's dreams with a rake for a hand. Because of course it's a rake. Since we're on the topic of the good ones, Citizen Kong. Treehouse of Horror, the 7th, Season 8, 1996, right before the American presidential election. Kang and Kodos abduct both candidates and replace them, and then run against each other. And when they're exposed midway through the campaign, the population's response is that they can't not vote for one of them because it's a 2-party system. And a man in the crowd says he'll vote for a 3rd party, and Kang tells him to go ahead and throw his vote away. Then the aliens win and enslave humanity, and Homer's line at the end is that they've been enslaved by aliens and it's not his fault, and the sky darkens. That aired in 1996. It has been recirculated before every American election since, and it will be recirculated before the next one. and it will still be accurate, which is either a triumph of political satire or a fairly bleak comment on 30 years of stasis, probably both. The same episode has the Genesis tub, in which Lisa's science fair project accidentally creates a civilization of microscopic people inside a tooth, who evolve, develop religion, identify her as their god, and then declare war on Bart for putting his finger in their ski. The show does a lot of things well. Nobody talks enough about the fact that it does theology quite well. Now, my honest opinion on the arc of the whole thing, and I'll try to be fair about it. The Treehouse episodes were, for the first 15 years or so, the best animated and often the sharpest episodes of any given season, because the format gave the writers total freedom and the animators an excuse to draw things they never otherwise got to draw. Blood, real perspective, actual darkness in the palette. Somewhere in the 2000s, they became more parody-driven and less horror-driven. The segment started tracking whatever film had recently done well rather than whatever was frightening. There's a stretch of them that are essentially recaps of the previous year at the cinema with yellow people in the roles. And then in the last decade, they've got interesting again, largely by going stranger. There's one that's a full Coraline pastiche. There's an It parody in season 34 called Not It that runs a full 22 minutes as a single story rather than 3 segments. The first time they'd broken their own format in 30-odd years. There's a Death Note one. There's a Westworld one. Treehouse of Horror presents A Simpsons Christmas Carol Exists, which is a Halloween-branded Christmas special, which is exactly the kind of thing a show does in year 34, and I respect it enormously. And here's a fun detail about Kang and Kodos specifically, because they're the only through line the whole tradition has. They are, as far as I can tell, the only characters who have appeared in every single Treehouse of Horror. Everyone. Sometimes as the main event, sometimes for a single line, sometimes just drifting past a window. It's a promise the show made to itself very early and has kept for 36 years. They were originally portrayed as siblings, incidentally. They're a couple. The show has confirmed they're a couple and almost nobody believes it. They're named after characters from Star Trek, they drool constantly, they laugh the same way every time, and they are voiced by Harry Shearer and Dan Castellaneta, so on top of everything else, those two men are also both of the aliens. There's a running gag in some episodes where the whole segment is built around the fact that they arrive expecting to conquer the planet and are immediately defeated by something stupid. On the subject of how these things actually get made, because the production reality is quite funny, Treehouse episodes take longer. More effects, more unusual designs, more one-off characters who exist for 4 minutes and then never again. The animators have described them as the most demanding episodes to work on and also the ones everybody wants. And they have a scheduling problem that has never been fully solved, which is that they routinely air in November. The show is on a network. The network shows American football on Sundays in the autumn. Football runs over, baseball runs over. The World Series lands right where Halloween is. And so, less often than not, the Halloween special goes out somewhere between the 1st and the 20th of November to an audience that has already taken the decorations down. They've made jokes about it. Season 12's Treehouse opened with the family complaining directly to camera that it was going out in November again. It has continued to go out in November. Since we're on the subject of things that recur, I should mention the couch gags for these, because they're separate. And often the best part. Treehouse couch gags are horror-themed and tend to be nastier than anything in the actual segments. The family arriving as corpses, the couch eating them. Guillermo del Toro's, which is a 2.5-minute film history homage crammed with references to about 60 horror films and which he apparently did for nothing because he wanted to. That's an Oscar-winning director volunteering to make a title sequence for a cartoon. Because it's this cartoon, and the last thing I want to say about Treehouse of Horror is the thing that I think explains why it's lasted. The show, as we've established at some length, cannot let anything happen, nobody ages, nothing sticks, the house gets rebuilt, everyone forgives everyone by Sunday. Treehouse of Horror is the one place where that rule is suspended entirely. Homer dies in these. Repeatedly. Bart dies. Lisa dies. Marge has been a witch, a monster, a corpse, and a ghost. The entire town has been destroyed more times than I can count. Springfield has been nuked, flooded, eaten, overrun, and folded into a different dimension. And because none of it counts, all of it can be true. That's a genuinely useful thing for a long-running show to have. A room where the furniture can be broken. Every October, or more accurately, every November, the writers get to take the toys apart completely. And then on the following Sunday, everything is exactly where it was. I think that's why the Treehouse episodes so often contain the sharpest writing of a given year. It's the only place where the stakes are real, precisely because they're not. But now, let's talk a little about the episodes they'd rather you didn't see. There is an episode of The Simpsons you cannot legally watch. It's called Stark Raving Dad. Season 3, first episode, aired September 1991. Homer gets sent to a psychiatric institution after wearing a pink shirt to work and failing a personality test. And while he's in there, he meets a large white man who believes sincerely that he is Michael Jackson. And the man is voiced by Michael Jackson, credited as John J. Smith, because of a recording contract that wouldn't let him appear under his own name. Speaking voice, his. Singing voice, a sound-alike called Kip Lennon, which was reportedly Jackson's own idea and reportedly amused him enormously. It's a well-liked episode. It has the birthday song Bart Writes for Lisa in it, which is one of the sweeter things in the early run. And in March 2019, after the Leaving Neverland documentary, the producers withdrew it. Al Jean and James L. Brooks made the decision along with Groening. It came off streaming, it came out of syndication packages, and it was removed from the Season 3 box set in subsequent pressings. Brooks's explanation at the time was fairly blunt. He said the episode's presence created an implication they were no longer comfortable with, and that this was the only responsible thing to do. So it exists on old discs in the memory of people who saw it, and nowhere else officially. An entire episode of the longest-running scripted show in American television, quietly removed from history. I don't have a tidy position on that. I think the decision is defensible, and I also think there's something uneasy about a piece of work simply ceasing to be available. Both things sit there. Since we're on the subject, the other withdrawals. There's a shot in a 1997 episode, The City of New York versus Homer Simpson, in which Homer's car is impounded between the two towers of the World Trade Center, and a good deal of the episode takes place there. After September 2001, the episode was pulled from syndication for a period, then edited in some markets, then eventually restored more or less intact. The show's own writers have talked about the awkwardness of it, that it's a very good episode about a man having a miserable day in New York, and that history reached back and put a weight on it that it was never built to carry. There's a treehouse segment involving a school shooting scenario that got shelved. There are gags cut for regional broadcast. And there is the entire question of Apu, which we covered, and which resulted in a character being retired rather than an episode being pulled. But now, let's talk about the things that never got made at all, because that's the bigger and much stranger category. The most famous is the Simpsons episode that was going to be about the family being stuck in a musical version of themselves. No, actually, the most famous is simpler than that. Let's do the real ones. There was a proposed episode in the early years in which Marge would leave Homer permanently and the show would deal with the aftermath across multiple episodes. It got as far as discussion and no further, for reasons which should be obvious given everything we've said about what this show can and cannot allow to happen. There was an episode idea about the family's finances collapsing entirely and them losing the house for good. There was a long-discussed concept for an episode about Springfield's real location being revealed, which several writers have said was pitched more than once and shot down every time on the correct grounds that the joke is worth more than the answer. and there was for years a persistent development track for a version of the film that would have been an extended Treehouse of Horror. Al Jean has referred to a weird Al-adjacent concept that circulated at one point. None of it happened. Since we're near the film, there's a genuinely large amount of cut material there. The 2007 movie went through something in the region of 100 drafts, which is not an exaggeration reported loosely, it's the figure the writers themselves have used. Entire subplots were animated and removed. There was a sequence with the family in Alaska that ran much longer. There was a whole Ralph plot. Minnie Driver recorded a part as a character who was cut from the film completely. Kelsey Grammer recorded Sideshow Bob material for it. Aaron Brockovich recorded a part. Both gone. Isla Fisher, Edward Norton, and Johnny Knoxville all recorded roles that didn't survive the edit. So there is, sitting in a vault somewhere, a version of that film with about 40 minutes of additional animated material featuring people who are not credited anywhere. But talking a bit about the deleted scenes from the series itself, because the show has an unusually good record of them being seen. The DVD commentaries, and there are commentaries on every episode of the first 20 seasons, which is an enormous body of talk, routinely discuss what got cut and why. And a lot of the cuts are for the most boring possible reason, which is time. An episode has to come in at a fixed length, and the animatic stage is where the surgery happens. The recurring pattern in those commentaries is a writer saying that a scene everyone loved got cut because it was the only thing that could go without breaking the story. That's the job. That's most of editing. There's a particularly good example in Cape Fear, which we've discussed. The episode came in short, which is how the rakes happened. But the same episode also lost material at the other end, and there's the case of the episode that got made twice. The Principal and the Pauper, which we covered, was reportedly rewritten substantially in production as the room's discomfort with it grew. And the final act, the town legislating the whole thing away, reads to a lot of people as a late addition designed to contain the damage. Now, since we're in this territory, the alternate versions, the show has multiple international edits. There are countries where entire jokes are replaced in dubbing rather than translated. The French and Quebecois dubs are famously quite different from each other. Quebec's version relocates a lot of the cultural references entirely and gives several characters regional accents that carry meanings the original doesn't have. Groundskeeper Willie, who is Scottish and English, has been variously Quebecois, Sardinian, and in the German dub, Bavarian. Sit with that as a translation problem for a second. The joke about Willie is that he's an outsider with an incomprehensible regional accent who is nonetheless completely embedded in the town. To translate that, you can't translate the words. You have to find your own country's version of that man, which every dubbing team has independently had to do. There are 30-odd Willies out there, each one a different country's idea of the same joke. The Japanese dub had a famously difficult time with the show generally, and it never really took hold there, which is one of the very few markets where it didn't. And in the Arabic language adaptation, which was made in 2005 and called Al-Shamshun, the changes went considerably further. Homer became Omar, Bart became Bader, the beer became a soft drink, Moe's became a cafe, the pork became beef, and every reference to Krusty was removed because a Jewish clown didn't work for the market. It ran for about half a season and was canceled, largely because, by most accounts, removing all of that removed the show. I find that genuinely instructive in a way I don't want to be smug about. You can localize a lot, but at some point the thing you have left isn't a version of the program, it's a different program wearing its face. And here's a fun detail to end on, and it's my favorite piece of buried Simpsons material. There are the Ullman shorts, all 48 of them, most of which have never had a proper commercial release. A handful turned up on the season 1 disc, and inside that 138th episode spectacular. The rest exist in the way that early television exists, on tape, in archives, in the hands of people who recorded them off air in 1987, and have been quietly maintaining them ever since. 48 small, ugly cartoons made as filler, that turned into the most valuable animation property in the world. And the majority of them have never been officially reissued. Somewhere there is a person with a shelf of VHS tapes who has the most complete surviving record of how this thing began. And that brings us to the enormous number of famous people who queued up to be in it. Thomas Pynchon has rarely been photographed in public for decades. He has no verified recent images. He has spent a lifetime constructing one of the most complete author disappearances in modern literature. He has been on The Simpsons twice, playing himself with a paper bag over his head. That is, for my money, the single most impressive booking in the history of television. Not because he's the most famous person they've had, he isn't by a distance, but because he is the person least likely to do anything at all. And he did this. His only condition, apparently, was that he wouldn't say anything insulting about Homer. His line on it was that Homer was his role model, and he couldn't speak ill of him. Which may or may not have been a joke, and I genuinely cannot tell. The show has, by the Guinness count, as of April 2020, hosted more guest stars than any other television program ever made. That figure is comfortably out of date now, and I'm not going to guess at the current one. But talking a bit about how the guest star thing actually evolved, because it changed shape completely over the run, and the change tells you a lot. In the early years, the rule was essentially that a guest played a character, not themselves, a character. Dustin Hoffman was in Lisa's substitute in season 2, playing Mr. Bergstrom, the supply teacher who is the first adult to take Lisa seriously and who then leaves. It's one of the 2 or 3 best episodes ever made, and his performance in it is completely straight, no winking, no acknowledgement, just a warm man being kind to a lonely child. And he was credited as Sam Eddick, which is a pun on Semitic. He didn't want his name on a cartoon. Michael Jackson was credited as John J. Smith, as we covered. Different reason, same outcome. That was the early ethos, and I think it produced the show's best guest work. The guest was a tool, not an event. You could watch Lisa's Substitute in 1991 without knowing who was in it, and it would work identically. Then somewhere in the mid-90s, the model flipped, and guests started playing themselves, and the appearance became the point. Both approaches produced classics, to be fair. Homer at the Bat from season 3 is 9 professional baseball players playing themselves, and it's magnificent, largely because the writers had them all lose in humiliating ways. Ken Griffey Jr. gets gigantism from too much nerve tonic. Wade Boggs gets punched out by Barney in an argument about British prime ministers. Don Mattingly gets thrown off the team over sideburns he does not have. The story around that episode is very good, incidentally. The recording sessions were scheduled around a baseball season. Half the players couldn't act at all. And Jose Canseco reportedly objected to his original storyline and had it rewritten, which is why his segment is about rescuing things from a burning house rather than what it was originally going to be. Since we're on the topic, the musicians. The Ramones are in season 5, playing Mr. Burns' birthday and insulting him. Aerosmith are in Moe's. Sonic Youth steal a picnic basket. Cypress Hill accidentally book the London Symphony Orchestra while high. Peter Frampton is there. That whole episode, Homerpalooza, is a season 7 artifact of a very specific mid-90s moment, and it holds up better than it should. Paul and Linda McCartney did Lisa the Vegetarian with the condition we covered. George Harrison did Brunch with Bono, or rather did a scene where he's completely unimpressed by Homer at a party. Ringo appears in season 2 answering fan mail from 1966, which means 3 of the 4 Beatles have been on the show in separate episodes across decades. Tony Bennett was the first musical guest in season 2, and Michael Jackson we've discussed at length, but now the odd ones because the odd ones are better. Stephen Hawking appeared several times, first in season 10, playing himself and being smarter than everyone in the room, including the local branch of Mensa. He apparently enjoyed it a great deal and came back. There's a moment where he tells Homer his theory of a donut-shaped universe is interesting and he may have to steal it, which Hawking reportedly requested. Buzz Aldrin, Stephen Jay Gould, Elon Musk in season 26 in an episode that has aged in ways nobody could have controlled for. Every single living former American president to have been offered it has, as far as I can tell, declined, which is why the show tends to use impressions instead. Leonard Nimoy turned up twice, and both times the joke was about how thoroughly he had given up on being anything other than Spock. Mark Hamill did an episode where he plays himself doing dinner theater and then teaches Homer to be a bodyguard, which is a peculiar thing to have existed years before his career revival. Meryl Streep played Bart's girlfriend in Bart's Girlfriend Season 6 as Jessica Lovejoy, the Reverend's daughter who is worse than Bart in every possible way. Meryl Streep, playing a fictional 10-year-old, being genuinely frightening. Glenn Close plays Homer's mother, Mona, and does it across a decade and a half, and the episodes she's in are among the saddest the show has. Kelsey Grammer we've covered. Albert Brooks, under the name A. Brooks, played Hank Scorpio and Cowboy Bob and the Whale Trainer and Brad Goodman, and is very widely considered the best recurring guest the show has ever had. His Scorpio in You Only Move Twice is a Bond villain who is also the nicest employer Homer has ever had, and the joke is entirely that Homer never notices the first part, Phil Hartman we've discussed. And then there's the category I find most interesting, which is people who came on and were quietly, obviously delighted to be there. There's a strain in guest star commentary the show's own on the DVDs of writers describing famous people arriving at the recording booth visibly nervous. Not about the work, about whether they'd be good enough for it. That's a strange status for a cartoon to have. But by about 1994, the show had become the thing that told you you'd arrived, and there are stories of agents pushing for it, and of people accepting one line. Since we're on the subject of one line, there's a phenomenon in the later seasons that's worth naming honestly. The guest star model in the modern show is often what people call a stunt booking, somebody very famous playing themselves for a scene in an episode built around their availability. That's the criticism, and there's something to it. The Lady Gaga episode in season 23 is routinely cited as the show's lowest rated by fans, and the objection isn't really to her. It's to an episode that exists because she was available. I don't want to be too hard on it though. The show has been doing this for 30 years, and it produced Hank Scorpio, and it produced Mr. Bergstrom. The model isn't the problem. The model is just more visible when the writing underneath it isn't carrying its weight. And here's a detail I love about the person who was in it most. Marsha Wallace, who we've talked about, was technically a guest star for years before becoming a regular. Frank Welker, who is the most prolific voice actor alive, has done animals on it. Maurice LaMarche does a huge amount of uncredited or lightly credited work. Tress MacNeille and Pamela Hayden and Russi Taylor between them built half the town without ever being in the opening credits as main cast. Russi Taylor played Martin Prince, Sherry, Terry, and Uter, among others. She was also the official voice of Minnie Mouse for over 30 years, and she was married to Wayne Allwine, the official voice of Mickey Mouse. Mickey and Minnie were married in real life, and Minnie was also every irritating child in Springfield. She died in 2019. Martin Prince was recast eventually after a period where the character simply didn't appear. That's the thing about a show this old. The guest star list is a list of who was famous decade by decade, and a fair number of them aren't here anymore. All of them took an afternoon, went into a booth, and were silly for a cartoon. And here's a fun detail I'll leave you with. There's a small, informal club of people who have appeared as themselves and then, in a later episode, appeared as a fictional character, or vice versa. There are people in Springfield who have played two entirely different roles decades apart, and nobody has ever remarked on it, which is exactly the sort of thing a town with no fixed geography and no working timeline should have. Since we're on the topic of the town, let's go and look at how it actually runs. The nuclear plant should not be legally operating. That's not a theory. That's a plot point the show has made explicitly, repeatedly, for 36 years. Inspectors are bribed or fooled. Safety violations run into the hundreds. The emergency procedures are a poster. There's a room with green sludge in it that nobody has ever explained. A supervisor sleeps at his post. Rods are carried around in pockets and dropped in the road. And it employs a substantial chunk of the town, which is the actual point of the joke. Because the plant isn't really about nuclear power. It's about what happens to a place that has exactly one employer and no leverage over it. Everyone in Springfield either works for Burns, depends on someone who works for Burns, or drinks with someone who does. The town's water, its jobs, its politics, and its health all run through one enormous building owned by one very old man who cannot remember any of their names. That's a company town. The show has been doing an extremely sharp company town satire since 1989, and it's mostly been received as a series of jokes about a fat man asleep at a desk. Sector 7G, incidentally, is Homer's post. He is a safety inspector. His qualification for this is that Burns needed someone and Homer was there. He has been fired and rehired an implausible number of times, and he has never once been trained. Since we're on the subject of institutions that don't work, the school. Springfield Elementary runs on nothing. That's the running joke, and it's remarkably consistent. The budget is always gone, always. Textbooks are decades out of date. The kindergarten has a sandbox with a cat in it. There's asbestos in the walls and a running gag where somebody says asbestos in a tone of mild concern and nobody does anything. Skinner and Chalmers' relationship is one of the great sustained bits of comic writing in the show. A middle manager and his boss, neither of whom respects the other, both trapped in a building neither can fix. Chalmers is technically the superior and is visibly the more competent man, and his function in nearly every scene is to arrive, observe something insane, say Skinner's name in a particular way, and leave. The teachers are all defeated in specific individual ways. Edna, as covered. Mr. Bergstrom, who leaves. Miss Hoover, who has a nervous condition and doesn't hide it from the children. The recurring detail that the staff room is a fortified position with a coffee machine, and that entering it as a pupil is treated as a security breach. Groundskeeper Willie lives in a shack on the grounds and is the only member of staff who does any physical work. And then there's Otto, who drives the bus, and about whom the show has made a decades-long joke that nobody has ever fully committed to, which is that he is almost certainly not fit to be driving children anywhere. But now, the church. The First Church of Springfield is a genuinely thoughtful piece of writing that people don't discuss enough because it's played almost entirely for jokes. Reverend Lovejoy, named for the street as we covered, arrived in Springfield as an idealistic young minister and was ground down. The show is explicit about the cause. It's Ned Flanders phoning him constantly, over decades, about matters of no importance whatsoever until Lovejoy stopped believing that any of it mattered. There's an episode in Marjorie Trust from season 8 that lays this out directly, and the resolution is that Lovejoy rediscovers the point of his job by rescuing Ned from a baboon enclosure. It's a joke, but the underlying observation that pastoral care burns people out and that the person who burns you out is usually the most devout one is not a joke at all. The congregation is the whole town, everybody bored, Homer asleep, Bart drawing, and the collection plate producing consistently disappointing results. And there are episodes about faith that treat it seriously. Homer the Heretic in season 4 is a genuinely careful piece of work about a man who decides he'd rather worship at home and is essentially proved right until he sets fire to his house. Since we're going around the civic institutions, the police, Springfield's police force is Chief Wiggum, Lou, and Eddie, and the show's position on them is not subtle. They arrive late, they eat throughout, they lose evidence. Wiggum takes bribes from Fat Tony openly. Cases are closed by accident or not at all. And the joke has aged into something quite a lot pointier than it was in 1991. Which I suspect the writers are aware of and which the show has not obviously changed course on. Lou, notably, is the competent one. Lou has been the competent one for 30-odd years and has never been promoted because if Lou were in charge, the jokes wouldn't work. Now, the media. Channel 6. Kent Brockman is a local news anchor whose defining characteristic is that he will pivot to whatever position keeps him alive. The line about welcoming our new insect overlords from the ant episode in Season 5 is the entire character in one sentence and has become a permanent internet template for capitulation. Alongside him, Arnie Pye in the traffic helicopter, who hates Brockman openly on air. Scott Christian, and the whole apparatus of local news treated as it deserves, a thing that exists to fill time between advertisements, occasionally stumbling into something true. The show's media satire is its most reliably good material, I think, and I'd point to the 400th episode as the concentrated version of it. Then there's the town government, Mayor Quimby, who is a Kennedy in a sash. His full name is a running joke of accumulated Irish-American names. His campaign literature has admitted to corruption. He has been re-elected regardless, repeatedly, which is the joke, and which is not really a joke. There's a town hall meeting in a substantial number of episodes, and it always goes the same way. Someone proposes something reasonable, the crowd turns, and the town does the stupidest available thing at speed. Marge versus the Monorail is the perfected version of this, and it's basically a study in how a town talks itself into a disaster in 20 minutes because a man sang at them. The Springfield mob works alongside all of this rather than against it. Fat Tony's operation is a legitimate part of the civic fabric. He has a relationship with the mayor, the police, and the school, and at one point supplies the school with milk in a manner that goes exactly how you'd expect. Since we're near the end of the tour, the healthcare, Dr. Hibbert is a competent physician with an inappropriate laugh, and the joke about him for 30 years has been that the laugh arrives at the worst possible moment. Dr. Nick Riviera is a man with a medical qualification from an institution that should not have one, offering procedures at prices that ought to be a warning. And the actual satire underneath both of them is about cost. Homer's family go to Hibbert when they can and Nick when they can't. And that distinction, that the quality of your care is a function of your budget, is stated repeatedly and directly, right? Moe's Tavern, and then I'll stop. Moe's should not be a going concern. 4 customers, no visible food, a telephone that only ever brings bad news. The most successful thing to happen to that bar was the Flaming Moe, which Homer invented and Moe stole, and which was destroyed by his own greed inside a single episode. But the bar functions as the town's other institution, the counterweight to the church. It's where the men of Springfield go to not be at home. And the show has been quietly honest about what that means. Barney's alcoholism is treated as a joke for years and then, deliberately, stops being one. Moe's loneliness is the source of most of his material and also the source of the show's occasional willingness to be genuinely bleak. The suicide attempts, of which there have been several, played for laughs. The relationship with a bar rag that got an origin story in season 23. And here's a fun detail about Moe's specifically, and then we'll move on. The prank call gag ran for years. Bart phones, asks for a name that Moe then shouts across the bar, and the bar laughs at him. It's one of the show's oldest and most reliable structures, and the writers reportedly ran out of usable ones at multiple points and had to keep inventing new construction methods for them. Eventually, the show did the version where Moe catches him, and then the version where Moe is expecting it, and then the version where the joke is the absence of the joke, which is, in miniature, the whole story of a show running for 36 years. You find something that works, you do it until it stops working, and then you make the not working into the new thing. And here's a fun detail. A few of these episodes changed the language. The Oxford English Dictionary defines dough as an exclamation of frustration at the realization that things have turned out badly, or not as planned, or that one has just said or done something foolish. It's been in there since 2001, not as slang, not as a curiosity noted in passing, as an entry with a definition sitting alongside every other word in the language. And the funny part, which I mentioned earlier and won't belabor, is that the word has never appeared in a Simpsons script. It's a stage direction that one man kept interpreting the same way. But that's not even the strangest one, because the strangest one is a word the show made up on purpose as a joke about made-up words. Lisa the Iconoclast, Season 7. The episode involves the debunking of a town founder, and along the way, it gives Springfield a town motto: a noble spirit embiggens the smallest man. Two teachers overhear it. One says she's never heard the word embiggen before moving to Springfield. The other replies that it's a perfectly cromulent word. Only cromulent was invented for that exchange. Only embiggen existed. The entire joke is that these are obviously fake words being used with total confidence by people who ought to know better. They are now real. Cromulent is in dictionaries. Embiggen is in dictionaries. And embiggen took a genuinely peculiar route to get there. It started turning up in physics papers, of all things, particularly in string theory contexts, apparently because it was a useful and slightly funny word for a specific kind of expansion. Once a word is in the literature, it's in the language, and then it turned up in a Marvel film, said seriously by a superhero, which was the point at which the joke fully escaped. So a gag about people using pretentious nonsense words has resulted in one pretentious nonsense word being adopted by physicists. I don't think there's a better outcome available for a joke, since we're on the topic meh. The show didn't invent meh, versions of it existed before, in Yiddish-influenced American speech and in a few print citations. But the show is very widely credited with making it universal, largely through an episode called Hungry, Hungry Homer, where Bart and Lisa deploy it as the ultimate expression of childhood indifference. It's now in dictionaries too, and it's genuinely difficult to remember how you expressed mild disinterest before it existed. Cheese-eating surrender monkeys is another one, and it's got a stranger afterlife than it deserves. It's a groundskeeper Willie line from Season 6 aimed at the French. And then in 2003, in the run-up to the Iraq War, it was picked up by actual political columnists and used in actual newspapers as a serious piece of rhetoric about French foreign policy. A joke written for a Scottish cartoon groundskeeper became a phrase in international political discourse. It was in the Financial Times. It's been in parliamentary discussion, which I think is a fairly grim little illustration of how easily a comic register can be borrowed for something that isn't a joke at all. Then there's the cadence stuff, which is subtler and probably more influential. Worst. Episode ever. That's comic book guy, and it's not really a phrase, it's a punctuation pattern, full stops between words for emphasis. And it is now everywhere. It's a template. Best day ever. You can build any sentence into it, and everyone understands the tone instantly, which is the mark of a genuinely successful bit of linguistic engineering. Ralph's lines have escaped the show entirely. There are people using them who have no idea where they came from. And the catchphrase economy is worth a moment because it's mostly from a very concentrated period. Eat my shorts. Ay caramba, don't have a cow. Excellent, from Burns with the fingers. Haha, from Nelson, which has become the standard internet notation for mockery. Why you little, from Homer. Followed by any noun at all. Hi everybody, and the response to it. Almost all of that was established in the first 5 or 6 years, and then the show spent the next 30 being slightly uncomfortable about it, which is exactly what Bart Gets Famous was about, as covered. There's a claim that goes around, and I want to flag it honestly rather than repeat it as fact, that the show rivals Shakespeare and the Bible as a source of everyday reference and quotation in English. You'll see that in articles about the show's linguistic impact. It's the sort of line that gets said rather than measured, and I'd treat it as an enthusiastic gesture rather than a finding. But the underlying point that an enormous number of people are quoting a cartoon without realizing they're quoting anything is fair enough. But now, let's talk a little about the music, because the show had a genuinely odd second career as a recording act. The Simpsons Sing the Blues came out on the 4th of December, 1990, It sold more than 2 million copies in America. And on it was Do the Bartman, which went to #1 in the UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere. The credited writer is Brian Loren. The open secret, later confirmed by multiple people, including Groening and Matt himself in interviews, is that Michael Jackson co-wrote and produced it and had substantial involvement uncredited because of his own recording contract. Jackson was also, around the same time, the guest voice in Stark Raving Dad, playing a man in a psychiatric institution who believes he's Michael Jackson, credited under a pseudonym, again for contractual reasons. His speaking voice is him. His singing voice in that episode is a sound-alike, which is a strange enough sentence on its own. That episode has since been withdrawn from circulation entirely following the allegations documented in Leaving Neverland, a decision the producers made in 2019. The rest of the discography is a fairly tidy run. Songs in the Key of Springfield in 1997, collecting the actual musical numbers from episodes. The Yellow Album in 1998, which was mostly original material and is largely forgotten. Go Simpsonic in 1999. Testify in 2007, covering the middle seasons, and the material on those compilations is genuinely good because Clausen's musical numbers were written properly. See My Vest, the Monorail song, which is a full Music Man pastiche written by Conan O'Brien, Baby on Board, Dr. Zayas, Talkin' Softball. Since we're near the merchandising, I'll close the chapter there. The show generated a merchandising industry measured in billions. And the thing I find most interesting about it is the timing, because the merchandising boom came first. By 1990, there were shirts everywhere, and dolls and posters and the bootlegs I mentioned, and a chart-topping novelty single. The show at that point was 1.5 seasons old and had not yet made most of the episodes anyone would call classic. So the cultural phenomenon arrived roughly 3 years before the artistic achievement did. The t-shirts got there before Marge versus the Monorail, which means that for a whole generation of people, the show was a merchandising event they were told off for liking, and then it quietly turned into one of the best written programs on television while nobody was updating their opinion. That mismatch is, I think, why the show spent so long being underrated by people who'd stopped paying attention in 1991. Now, let's talk about the predictions thing because you knew it was coming, right? So this is the single most over-discussed Simpsons topic on the internet, and I want to do it properly rather than either gushing about it or being sniffy about it, because there are 3 separate things going on here, and they get mashed together constantly. There are the genuine ones, which are interesting, there are the fake ones, which are numerous, and there's the explanation, which is more satisfying than the mystery. Let's do the genuine ones first. Bart to the Future aired on the 19th of March, 2000. It's the flash forward where Bart is 40 and a failure, and Lisa is president of the United States. And in her first scene as president, she's dealing with the state of the country and refers to having inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. That's the entire reference. One line played as an absurdity because in 2000, the idea of Donald Trump as president was self-evidently a joke. He was a property developer and a tabloid personality who had publicly flirted with running. 16 years later. The writer of that line, Dan Graney, has explained the reasoning since, and it's not mystical. The joke was about America hitting rock bottom, and Trump was chosen as the most vivid available shorthand for that. The prediction was, in the writer's own framing, a warning rather than a forecast. And when it came true, the show responded in the way it responds to everything. The first episode to air after the 2016 election was Havana Wild Weekend, and the chalkboard gag read, "Being right sucks," 4 words. That's a better piece of writing than any of the think pieces that followed it. The second genuine one is the Disney thing, and this is the one that still slightly gets me. When You Dish Upon a Star from 1998. There's a background gag, a shot of a studio building, with signage identifying it as 20th Century Fox, a division of Walt Disney Co. That's a joke about corporate consolidation. It's a throwaway. It's the sort of gag a writer's room produces in 4 seconds while talking about something else. And in 2019, Disney completed the acquisition of 21st Century Fox, which means the show that made the joke is now owned by the company in the joke and streams on that company's platform. And the joke is right there in the library where anyone can watch it. That one unnerves me slightly, and I'll tell you exactly why. It's not that they guessed. It's that the joke's premise was that this would be absurd, that consolidation had gone so far it was ridiculous to imagine it going further, and reality simply carried on past it without slowing down. The rest of the standard list is thinner than people claim, but a few hold up. Smartwatches in the same flash-forward era, video calling, a shot in an episode that resembles a much later news event closely enough to be worth a raised eyebrow. Some sports and awards, results that were straightforward coin flips presented afterwards as prophecy. Now, the fakes, because there are a lot of them and they're most of what circulates. An enormous proportion of viral Simpsons predictions are doctored images. Someone takes a frame, edits in a headline or a face or a date, and it goes round. Others are stills from entirely different shows or films, misattributed. Others are real frames from real episodes with completely invented context attached. There's a reliable pattern to it. After any significant world event, within about 48 hours, an image will circulate claiming the show called it. Most of the time it didn't. Sometimes there's a real episode with a loose thematic similarity that's been described in a way that makes it sound specific. The show's own people have got quite tired of this, understandably. So, the explanation, and I want to give this plainly because I think it's genuinely more interesting than treating it as spooky. Reason 1 is volume. This show has produced something in the region of 800 episodes across 36 years. Each one contains dozens of background gags, throwaway lines, signs, newspapers, and jokes. Multiply that out, and you're looking at hundreds of thousands of discrete comic assertions about the world. Some of them are going to land. That's not prophecy, that's arithmetic. Reason 2 is who was writing them. The Simpsons writers' room, particularly in the classic era, was unusually stacked with people from mathematics, physics, and computer science backgrounds. Harvard, mostly, people with doctorates. There are episodes with genuine mathematics buried in the background as jokes for an audience of about 400 people worldwide. When a room like that speculates about the future, it isn't guessing randomly. It's extrapolating from things it actually understands. Reason 3, and this is the important one. Satire is extrapolation. That's the mechanism, and it isn't complicated. A satirist takes something that is already happening and pushes it one step further to make it visible. Corporate consolidation was already happening in 1998. The joke was the next step. Celebrity politics was already happening in 2000. The joke was the next step. And the reason the jokes keep coming true is not that the writers can see forward. It's that the thing they were exaggerating kept going in the direction it was already going. That's not a supernatural claim. It's a slightly depressing structural one. Reason 4 is selection bias, and it's the one nobody accounts for. Nobody makes compilation videos of the thousands of predictions that didn't happen. Lisa isn't president. There was no monorail. The country didn't do most of what the show suggested it might. We only count the hits because the misses aren't a video. Since we're on the topic, the show has had a great deal of fun with its own reputation here. Lisa the Boy Scout, the season 34 episode I mentioned earlier, includes a sequence where a 30-year-old Bart appears in a vision to reel off predictions. A Nobel Prize winner, Trump, pandemics, a specific World Cup scoreline, Disney buying Fox, and then Fox being bought by a media conglomerate that appears to be acquiring everything. It's the show acknowledging the whole phenomenon and immediately taking the mickey out of it. And that's the right response. I think the prediction thing is a fandom game rather than a property of the show. and the show has been generous enough to play along without ever pretending it's real. My honest position, for the record, Trump doesn't bother me. It was a joke about a famous man being ridiculous, and he later became president. And famous, ridiculous men becoming president is one of the more predictable failure modes of a celebrity culture. A room full of clever satirists would land that eventually. The Disney one bothers me a bit because it's a joke about the limits of absurdity that turned out to be an underestimate. And there's something about being able to open the streaming service that owns the show and watch the show joke about being owned by the streaming service that produces a very specific, low-level, 1 a.m. sort of unease. Not a conspiracy, just a loop that closed a bit too neatly. Since we're on the subject of things the show made up, let's go and look at the television inside the television. Itchy and Scratchy have been running since 1928. That's in universe, and the show has been specific about it. There's an episode that presents the first Itchy short, Steamboat Itchy, as a 1928 production, which places it deliberately alongside Steamboat Willie. And the joke is that Springfield's cartoon mouse has been dismembering a cat since the exact moment that Disney's cartoon mouse started whistling. A cat and a mouse. The mouse wins, almost always. Every single time, across nearly 100 years of fictional history, Itchy kills Scratchy in a new way, and Scratchy does not learn. And what I find genuinely clever about it is that it isn't a parody of Tom and Jerry. Not really. It's a parody of the relationship between children and violent cartoons. The Simpsons children watch it, delighted, and the adults around them periodically panic about it, and neither position is treated as correct. There's an episode in Season 6, Itchy and Scratchy Land, where the family visit the theme park, and the entire thing is a Westworld structure. The robots turn on the guests, and it ends with the parents having a lovely time relaxing on Parent Island after the animatronics have been destroyed. And there's the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie show from Season 8, which is the show doing an episode about a long-running series bringing in a new character to arrest declining ratings. That episode is 30 years old, and it contains every argument about the show that has been made since. There's a scene where the network executives explain that they need something with attitude. There's a fan at a convention complaining that the last episode was the worst thing he'd ever seen, and there's the writer's response, which is a question about whether the man was in some way forced to watch it or whether he might in fact be entitled to nothing at all. I'd point anybody who wants to understand this show's self-awareness at that episode and nothing else. Now, the rest of the in-universe media, because Springfield has an entire culture of its own, and it's remarkably fleshed out. Radioactive Man is the town's superhero property, and the show's treatment of him is a compressed history of American comics. He starts as a wartime patriotic character, becomes camp in the 60s with a boy sidekick called Fallout Boy, gets grim and violent in the 90s, and is periodically rebooted. There's an episode, Radioactive Man, in Season 7, where they film the movie in Springfield, and Milhouse gets cast as Fallout Boy and hates every second of it. It's a proper piece of satire about film production, the budget, the tax incentives, the local businesses gouging the crew, the child performer's misery. And it's also the first episode the show used digital animation on, as we covered. Then there's McBain, who is Rainier Wolfcastle's action hero and who exists mostly in fragments. There's a running gag across several early seasons where the McBain clips, if you assemble them in order, form a complete and coherent film. Fans worked that out years later. Whether it was deliberate from the start or a happy accident depends on which writer you ask, and I choose the version where it was deliberate. Duff Beer is the town's other cultural institution. Duffman, who arrived in Season 9, is a mascot in a costume with a catchphrase and an unspecified number of men inside him over the years. The show has made the joke that Duffman is a role, not a person, and that Duffmen have died. He was retired in a Season 37 episode, which I only mention because it's a genuinely odd thing to retire a beer mascot in year 37. Krusty's operation is the biggest of them. Krusty the Clown Show, plus the merchandise, plus the burgers, plus the theme park, plus the branded products that are all faintly dangerous. Krusty brand imitation gruel, the home pregnancy test, the cereal with the jagged metal, and the joke there is precise. Krusty's merchandise is bad because Krusty does not care, and Krusty does not care because he is exhausted and broke and being audited. It's a joke about licensing made by a program that was, at the time, the most licensed thing in the world. Since we're on Springfield's media, Channel 6 we covered. But there's also the local film industry, the local radio, and my favorite of the lot, which is the town's newspaper, the Springfield Shopper. Headlines visible for a fraction of a second in the background of scenes, and about half of them are jokes that nobody was expected to read. There's a whole subgenre of fan archiving devoted purely to freeze-framing those. Same with the marquee outside the Aztec Theater, which always has a film title on it, and the church sign, which always has a message. Not every episode, but many of them, for 36 years. 2 more slots that nobody needed to fill, and somebody filled anyway. And here's a fun detail I like enormously: Troy McClure's introductions. You may remember me from such films as, and then 2 titles, always invented, always specific, always slightly sad. Educational films about hygiene, instructional videos for products nobody wants, films with names that tell you the exact shape of a failed career. Phil Hartman delivered dozens of those, and the construction is identical every time, and it never once got old because the joke isn't the format. The joke is the titles, and somebody sat down and wrote 100 of them, which is a decent moment to talk about the people who wrote all this down. There is a proof of a false counterexample to Fermat's last theorem in the background of an episode of this show, not a joke about maths. An actual pair of numbers generated deliberately, which look as though they satisfy the equation, and which will survive a check on most calculators because the discrepancy falls below the display precision. Somebody sat down and computed that so it could appear on a blackboard for about 4 seconds as a background gag in a cartoon. That's the writer's room, and once you know that's the sort of person who was in it, a great deal about the show makes sense. The staffing history is genuinely unusual. From very early on, it drew heavily on people with hard science and mathematics backgrounds who had gone into comedy instead. There were multiple advanced degrees in that room. There were people who had published. David X. Cohen came in with a physics and computer science background, and later ran Futurama. Ken Keeler has a doctorate in applied mathematics, and famously wrote and proved an original theorem for a Futurama episode, purely because the plot needed one to exist and none did. Al Jean went to Harvard at 16 to study mathematics. And what that produces isn't math's jokes mostly, it produces a particular kind of rigor. The show's absurdity is almost always internally consistent. If a premise is established, its consequences get followed properly, and the joke usually comes from following them further than anyone expects rather than from abandoning them. On the culture of that room, because the accounts of it are consistent and slightly alarming. Long hours, very long, rewrites running past midnight routinely through the night at deadline. Food ordered in, a whiteboard. The script projected on a wall, being taken apart line by line by a dozen people simultaneously. The rule, as it's usually described, was that the best joke wins regardless of who said it, and that nobody defends their own material, which sounds healthy and by most accounts, mostly was and was also brutal for anyone who arrived expecting their draft to survive. George Meyer, as we covered, was the person most associated with the room's sensibility. John Vitti, Jeff Martin, Wallace Wolodarski, Jay Kogan, Sam Simon, Mike Rice, Al Jean, John Swartzwelder, Conan O'Brien, Bill Oakley, Josh Weinstein, David Merkin, Greg Daniels, Brent Forrester, Dan McGrath. Look at that list for a second, because half of it went on to build the rest of American comedy. Conan O'Brien wrote for 2 years, produced Marge vs. the Monorail and Homer Goes to College, and left in 1993 to take over Late Night, which at the time was considered an insane career decision by nearly everybody. Greg Daniels went off and co-created King of the Hill with Mike Judge, and then developed the American version of The Office, and then Parks and Recreation, and then Space Force and Upload. Brent Forrester went to The Office as well. David X. Cohen and Groening built Futurama, which ran, stopped, came back, stopped, and came back again, and which is a show that a certain kind of person will tell you is actually better. Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein ran seasons 7 and 8, arguably the most character-driven stretch the show ever had, and then went off to make Mission Hill. Mike Rice wrote for Everything and also wrote a memoir about the whole business that is very funny and slightly unhinged. Nell Scoville, one of the few women in that early room, wrote about the experience afterwards and was fairly direct about what it was like. And the show's staffing record in its first decade is not a thing anyone involved defends now. That's worth saying plainly rather than skating past. The room that produced the Golden Age was overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly Harvard, and the show's blind spots tracked that composition fairly precisely. It got better, slowly, and it took a long time. Since we're on the subject of the ones who stayed, the showrunner history is the cleanest way to understand the eras. Simon and Rice at the start, Merkin for 5 and 6, Oakley and Weinstein for 7 and 8, Mike Scully for 9 through 12, Al Jean from 13 onwards, for 2 decades, which is one of the longest single showrunning tenures in television, and Matt Selman taking an increasing share from around season 33. That's it, 6 regimes in 36 years, which for a program of that length is remarkably stable. And here's the detail about that stability that I think matters. A show that changes hands constantly loses its voice. A show that never changes hands calcifies. This one has done something in between, long tenures with real handovers and enough continuity of staff underneath that the house style survived every transition. You can hear the difference between a Merkin season and an Oakley and Weinstein season if you're listening for it. What you can't hear is a season that sounds like a different program. But now the bit I actually find moving about all this, and then I'll leave the writers alone. Almost nobody in that room set out to do this for 30 years. It was a job on a cartoon at a network that might not survive. Several of them have said in various ways that they assumed it would run 3 seasons and then they'd move on to proper television, meaning live action, meaning the thing that was respectable in 1990. And instead, the cartoon became the most durable thing any of them would ever touch. And the ones who left to do proper television mostly ended up making things that look structurally quite a lot like the cartoon. The workplace ensemble, the town full of named minor characters, the joke density, the refusal to let the emotional beat be sentimental. That's the show's actual legacy, I'd argue, not the merchandise and not the records. A generation of writers who learned a particular way of building a joke in one room over a few years and then went out and built everything else. And since we're talking about the things that stay with you, let's talk about the ones that make people cry. A show built to reset everything by Sunday should not be able to hurt you. And yet, I want to spend a while on this because it's the part of the program that gets discussed least and is probably the reason it lasted. Plenty of things were funny in 1993. Almost none of them are still on. Start with Lisa's Substitute, Season 2. Mr. Bergstrom is a supply teacher. He is kind, he is clever, he takes Lisa's work seriously, and he treats her as a person rather than a precocious child. And then he leaves, because supply teachers leave, and Lisa runs through the station, and the thing he gives her is a note. It says, "You are Lisa Simpson." That's it. That's the whole gift. A piece of paper telling a child that the thing she is worried about being is in fact the thing that will save her. Homer's role in that episode is to be inadequate, and to know it, and to try anyway. He doesn't understand what she's lost. He makes it worse. And then, at the very end, he does the one thing available to him, which is to be silly enough to make her laugh. I don't think the show ever did anything better. I think it did things as good, Lisa's Wedding, and Maggie Makes 3, Mother Simpson, but not better. Since we're on it, and Maggie Makes 3, Season 6, it's a flashback. The children ask why there are no photographs of Maggie in the house. Homer explains that he had quit the plant, was happy, was working at a bowling alley, and then Marge got pregnant and he had to go back to Burns and beg for his job, and Burns gave it to him and put a sign above his desk reading, "Don't forget, you're here forever." And the episode ends with the reveal that all the photographs of Maggie are in fact in one place. Homer has taken them and stuck them over the sign so that it now reads, "Do it for her." I've seen grown adults go quiet at that. It's a sight gag. It's a sight gag that reframes an entire man's working life as a deliberate act of love, in one shot with no dialogue. Mother Simpson from Season 7 is the one where Homer finds out his mother is alive. She's been in hiding for decades as a political fugitive after sabotaging one of Burns' operations. She comes back, they have a few days, Burns finds her, and she has to run again. And the last shot of that episode is Homer sitting alone on the bonnet of his car, looking at the sky for a very long time with no jokes while the credits play in silence. They ran silent credits on a comedy in 1995. Then there's Lisa's Wedding, which we covered structurally earlier. What I didn't say is what actually lands in it, which is not the wedding. It's the moment Homer, in the future, hands her something and says he knows he embarrasses her, and that he's always going to. Round Springfield Season 6 is the one where Bleeding Gums Murphy dies, and Lisa is the only person in town who cares, and she plays for him on the radio, and the sky opens up. Bart Sells His Soul Season 7, which is about a boy discovering that a thing he doesn't believe in might be real by noticing its absence. The dogs won't come to him. The automatic doors don't open. Nothing tastes of anything. That's a genuinely frightening piece of writing dressed as a comedy about a bit of paper, onto how they actually do it, because there's a technique and it's consistent. Rule 1, never announce it. The score doesn't swell in advance. The scene doesn't slow down to tell you something is coming. In almost every case, the emotional beat arrives immediately after a joke, at the same pace as the joke. Rule 2, no speeches. The characters do not explain what they are feeling. Homer, particularly, is almost never articulate about it. The show's most reliable move is to have him try to say something and fail, and to let the failure carry the weight. Rule 3, an object rather than a statement. The note, the photographs over the sign, the tape recorded over the wedding video, which we covered in the film, the saxophone on the roof. Rule 4, and this is the one that makes the rest of it work. They earn it by having spent 20 minutes being unsentimental. You can only get away with a moment like that if you have not been asking for it. The show is cruel to these people constantly, which is precisely why the audience believes it when it's kind. Since we're being honest, the later run has a version of this too, and it gets dismissed unfairly. Eternal Moonshine of the Simpsons. Mind, Season 19, is a fractured memory episode that works backwards through Homer's mind and is genuinely inventive. Holidays of Future Past, which we covered. Bart Hood, Halloween of Horror, which is the rare non-treehouse Halloween episode, and is actually about a frightened child and her father. The Larry the Barfly episode from Season 35, where the town realizes they don't know anything about a man who was there every day for 35 years, which is a genuinely uncomfortable thing to build an episode around, and which they did anyway. And here's my honest position, which I've been circling all night. The reason this show became furniture, the reason there are millions of people who leave it running in an empty room, is not that it's comforting in the soft sense. It's not soothing. It's a program about a struggling family in a failing town with a poisoned water supply. It's that it takes them seriously. Every single one of those emotional episodes is built on the assumption that the interior life of a nuclear safety inspector who cannot spell is worth 22 minutes of proper attention. That a lonely 8-year-old's grief over a jazz musician she met twice is real grief. That a woman doing the washing up has an inner life large enough to hold an entire episode. That's an unfashionable position, and the show has held it on and off for 36 years. In between jokes about a man being hit by a train, which is what I'd say if anybody asked me why it's still on. And that brings us around to the songs, because a surprising number of those moments have an orchestra underneath them. There is a full Broadway musical version of Planet of the Apes inside an episode of this show, and it is better than it has any right to be. Season 7, A Fish Called Selma. Troy McClure, whose career is in ruins for reasons the episode is extremely coy about, takes a role in Stop the Planet of the Apes, I Want to Get Off. And what you get is about 90 seconds of genuine musical theater, proper orchestration, proper structure, a key change, a rhyme scheme that holds up, and a chorus line of apes, Dr. Zaius, sung to the tune of Rock Me Amadeus. I have thought about that arrangement more than I've thought about most real musicals, and this is the thing about the songs. They're not novelty items. They were written properly by people who could write, and scored by an orchestra that could play, which is why a startling number of them work as music rather than just as jokes. But now let's talk about the biggest one, the Monorail song from Marge vs. the Monorail Season 4. It's a Music Man pastiche, specifically You Got Trouble, the con man's patter number, and it was written by Conan O'Brien, who wrote the episode before he had a talk show. The structure of it is the reason the episode works. A stranger arrives in a town with money it doesn't know what to do with, and he sings at them, and by the end of the song, they have voted to buy a monorail. The song is not decoration, the song is the mechanism of the plot. It's how the con is executed, and it's executed on the audience at the same time as the town. Then the monorail is built badly and nearly kills everyone, and Leonard Nimoy is there and nobody ever mentions it again. Since we're on the topic of songs that do plot work, see My Vest, Season 6, 201 Greyhounds. Mr. Burns, having acquired a large number of puppies, sings a Beauty and the Beast parody about the garments he intends to make from them. It's Be Our Guest, structurally, with the cheer replaced by escalating cruelty, and Harry Shearer sings the entire thing in character. That's a Disney parody that aired 24 years before Disney bought the company that made it. Then there's We Do, the Stonecutters song from Season 6. A secret society reveals its full membership and purpose in a single number, including their responsibility for keeping the metric system down and for keeping the Martians under wraps. It ends with the admission that they hold back the electric car and rig every Oscar night. Every line is a separate conspiracy theory, and the song simply moves through them at pace. And there are people who can still recite all of it. Baby on Board, the barbershop number from Season 5's Homer's Barbershop Quartet, which is a full Beatles parody episode, the group forms, gets famous, breaks up, and reunites on a rooftop. The song itself was written to be genuinely singable, and it charted in the show's world and became an earworm in this one. Since we're near it, Talkin' Softball, the closing number of Homer at the Bat, which is a Talkin' Baseball parody summarizing the entire disastrous plot in about 45 seconds and rhyming 9 ruined baseball careers. And the Spider Pig song from the film, which is 8 seconds long and which people sang at each other for approximately 18 months in 2007. Now, onto who actually made all this sound the way it does. We covered Alf Clausen's tenure earlier, so I won't go over it again. What I want to add here is the specific working reality of it, because it's genuinely unusual. He was scoring a comedy every week to picture, with a live orchestra, in an era when almost every other television show had moved to synthesizers and libraries. That means every emotional beat in 20-odd years of this show, every quiet moment between Homer and Lisa, every chase, every sad ending, has an actual orchestral cue written for that specific moment by a person who watched it. And comedy scoring is harder than drama scoring because you have to be funny and also not step on the joke. There's a whole craft to it that nobody notices when it's done well, which is most of the time. There's a detail I find quietly lovely, which is that the music editor Chris Ledesma worked on the show for more than 30 years and kept a running record of the music across essentially the entire run. Every cue, every song, every arrangement. He wrote about it publicly for years. That means the show has an unusually complete musical archive for a television program because one man decided to keep it. Since we're on the subject of the recordings, the albums we covered earlier collect a good deal of this. Songs in the Key of Springfield in 1997 is the one worth having. It's the actual musical numbers in sequence with the dialogue around them, and it works as an album in a way that a compilation of cartoon songs really shouldn't. And here's the thing I actually want to say about the music, and then I'll leave it. The reason the songs land is that the show never signals them. There's no lead-in. Nobody says, right, here comes a number, a scene is happening, and then somebody starts singing at full production value with an orchestra that has clearly been sitting there the whole time. And then the song ends and the scene carries on as though nothing happened. That's a very specific comic technique, and it's the same one the show uses for everything else. Don't announce it. Do it completely straight. Let the audience work out that something absurd is occurring while it's already occurring. It's why a barbershop quartet can turn into a Beatles documentary and back inside 22 minutes without anybody blinking. And now let's talk about what happened when all of this got let loose on the internet. Somewhere around 2014, the show stopped being a television program and became a source material. I don't mean that dismissively, I mean it literally. There is now an enormous amount of cultural activity that consists of taking frames from the show and using them to say things, and the people doing it are frequently not doing it about the show at all. The best example is the old man yelling at a cloud. It's a newspaper clipping from an episode in season 13, a photograph of Abe Simpson with the headline that an old man yells at a cloud. 4 seconds of screen time. It is now the standard visual shorthand worldwide for someone complaining pointlessly about the direction of the world. People use it who have never seen the episode. People use it who could not name the character. Steamed hams we covered. Same phenomenon, different scale. And there's a whole category of these. The one with the 2 buttons. The one where Homer backs into the hedge, which became the universal image for wanting to disappear from a conversation. Skinner asking whether he is out of touch and concluding that it's the children who are wrong. The bus of children in the tunnel, Ralph's various expressions, the pile of soil at a funeral, old man yells at cloud and am I out of touch, have both been used seriously in newspaper opinion columns, which puts them in the same category as the Surrender Monkeys line from earlier, a joke escaping into the discourse and being deployed without irony. On to why this show specifically, because it isn't an accident. There are 3 reasons, and they're all structural. The first is volume. 800-odd episodes at roughly 22 minutes each, at 24 frames a second, is a genuinely enormous number of individual images. Statistically, whatever face you need to express whatever feeling you have, somebody in Springfield has already pulled it. The second is the animation style. The characters are simple, high contrast, and enormously expressive. A Simpsons frame reads instantly at any size, on any screen, in any compression. That's a design property, and it happens to be exactly what an image needs in order to survive being reposted 4,000 times. The third is the shared vocabulary. For an entire generation, this is the common text. You can use a frame from it and be reasonably confident that the person seeing it has the reference, which is not true of very much anymore. Since we're on the topic, there was a tool called Frinkiac that made all of this considerably easier. A searchable archive of essentially every frame of the classic run with the subtitles attached, so you could type a line and get the image. Somebody built that for free because they wanted it to exist. There was a Futurama equivalent afterwards. That's the fan culture in miniature. Somebody wanted a thing and made it and gave it away. Now, the marathons. In August 2014, FXX ran every episode that had aired to that point back to back, in order for 12 straight days. 552 episodes plus the film. No breaks. And people watched it. Not a token audience, a genuinely large one sustained across nearly 2 weeks, in a way that surprised the network and effectively proved the value of the library rights they just bought. That marathon is, I think, the moment the modern relationship with the show got established. It demonstrated that the value wasn't in new episodes. It was in the fact that there were so many old ones that you could simply leave it on, which is exactly the thing that the always-on stream formalized later, and it's the thing this video is a version of. But now, let me talk about the fandom itself, because it has a particular character. Simpsons fandom has an unusually strong archival streak. There are people who have cataloged every chalkboard gag, every couch gag, every background sign, every fictional film title on a marquee. There are databases of the books on Lisa's shelves. There is an entire subculture devoted to the show's fake products and fake brands. There's a long-running project to identify every single one of the show's Easter eggs on the back wall of the Quickie Mart. And there's the writing culture, decades of episode-by-episode reviews, podcasts going through the whole run in order at a rate of 1 a week, which if you do the arithmetic is a commitment of about 15 years. Since we're on that, the podcasts, Talking Simpsons, Four Finger Discount, and a substantial number of others, all unofficial, all essentially doing the same thing, watching it again in order with someone else. And in 2025, Nancy Cartwright announced an official one, with writers and directors and guests, which is the show finally acknowledging that the conversation about it has been running for 20 years without it. Now, the less pleasant part of the fandom, honestly, there is a very well-established internet position that the show has been bad since a specific season, and the specific season varies according to when the person saying it was 11 years old. That correlation is close enough to perfect that it's essentially a law. The phrase worst episode ever, which the show itself coined through Comic Book Guy, has been used against the show by its own audience more or less continuously since 1997, which is a strange loop. The program invented the exact register in which it would be complained about, and then was complained about in it for the next 30 years. The show's response to that has generally been good-humored. Comic Book Guy exists as a character partly to hold that position and be gently mocked for it. There's an episode where he reviews the show he is in. My honest position on the whole thing, and then I'll drop it, is that the Golden Age argument stopped being interesting about 20 years ago. It's true that seasons 3 to 8 are extraordinary. It's also true that there are perfectly good episodes in season 33, and that the people who say otherwise mostly haven't watched them. And here's a fun detail to finish with. There is a genre of internet content, quite large now, that consists of extremely long videos of the show playing quietly for people to sleep to, or work to, or leave on in an empty room. It exists because of everything in this chapter, because there's enough material, because it's familiar, because it doesn't demand anything, which means that the same properties that made the show memeable, the volume, the simplicity, the shared vocabulary, are the properties that made it into ambient furniture. I'm aware of exactly how self-referential that observation is, given what you're currently listening to. But talking a bit about the one time they took it to the cinema. They started trying to make it in about 1992, and it came out in 2007. 15 years. That's the development period, on and off, for a 90-minute film, based on a show that was already on the air producing 22 episodes a year. The reason it took that long is boringly practical and quite interesting. The people capable of writing the film were the same people writing the show, and the show was not going to stop. So a film could only happen if a substantial chunk of the writing staff went off and did it simultaneously with everything else. which is eventually what happened. They assembled a room of the show's best-regarded writers, past and present: Al Jean, Mike Rice, George Meyer, John Swartzwelder, John Vitti, David Merkin, Mike Scully, Matt Selman, Ian Maxtone Graham, Groening, Brooks, and put them in a room together for years, more than 100 drafts. That's the figure the writers used themselves, and it's not a rhetorical flourish. Entire versions of the story were built and thrown away. The premise that survived is small, which I think was the right instinct. Homer adopts a pig. The pig produces waste. Homer, having been told not to, dumps a silo of it in the lake. The lake, already the most polluted body of water in the country, tips over. The government responds by sealing the entire town under an enormous glass dome. And then the family escape and are hunted and go to Alaska, and Homer has to decide whether to come back for a town that wants him dead. Since we're on the dome, there's an awkward footnote. Stephen King's Under the Dome came out in 2009 with a very similar central image, and there was a certain amount of comment about it at the time. King's response essentially was that he had had the idea in the 70s, started it, abandoned it, and come back to it. The show's people were equally relaxed. Nobody accused anybody of anything, which is a refreshingly adult outcome for that kind of coincidence. Now, what the film actually does well, because I think it's underrated and I want to make the case. The first thing is that it's about Homer and Marge rather than about spectacle. The dome is a device. The actual story is that Marge finally reaches the end of what she can forgive, and she records a message saying so, and she uses a tape from their wedding to do it, taping over it. That's a genuinely brutal piece of writing. She doesn't shout. She explains calmly that she is done, and the physical object she chooses to say it on is the record of the day she started. The second thing is the pacing. It moves. There's a decision at the structural level not to pad it out to 2 hours, and the result is a film that runs about 87 minutes and doesn't have a slow section in it. The third thing is that it's genuinely funny. Not consistently at the level of season 5, but the hit rate is high, and the jokes are constructed rather than referenced. Spider-Pig, which is 8 seconds, and which became the marketing campaign whether they wanted it or not. Green Day dying in the opening in a Titanic parody, having been sunk by a hostile crowd for attempting to discuss the environment. The Alaskan bar with the Blade Runner reference, the man who sells them everything. The Inuit shaman sequence, which is a proper piece of animation and is also completely mad. And the bit I'd defend hardest, which is the 90-second sequence where the family are being pursued and the whole town is watching, and it holds a genuine amount of tension for a cartoon. Since we're on the technical side, the animation. The film was made at Film Roman with additional work elsewhere in widescreen at a level of detail the series would not reach for another 2 years. It was still traditional in construction, the same house style deliberately rather than a redesign, but with proper cinematic lighting, camera movement, and backgrounds with actual depth in them. There was a decision, which I think was correct, not to make it look like a different show. A lot of television to film adaptations use the budget to become unrecognizable. This one used it to become the same thing, better lit. Hans Zimmer scored it, working around Elfman's theme rather than replacing it, and the score is much better than a comedy of that scale required. Budget of around $75 million. It took over $500 million worldwide and reviewed extremely well, around 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, which for a film based on a show that a large part of the critical establishment had written off a decade earlier was a genuine surprise. And then, as we covered nothing for a very long time, but now, the bit that interests me most about the film, which is what it did to the show around it. It came out between seasons 18 and 19. The series was at that point in the middle of its longest stretch without a strong critical narrative. The period where most of the loud voices had stopped watching, and the show was quietly producing 24 episodes a year for an audience that hadn't left. The film's success was a demonstration that the machine still worked when it was given time and attention. which is, if you're being uncharitable, also a fairly direct comment on what a weekly production schedule does to writing. I don't think that's the whole story. There are plenty of superb episodes made in a fortnight and plenty of poor ones made slowly. But it's not nothing that when they took the same writers and gave them years instead of weeks, the result was that good. Since we're here, the cast worked on it in a way they don't normally. The main 6 recorded together in a room, which apparently almost never happens on the series anymore for scheduling reasons. And several of them have talked about how different that is. That comedy timing between performers only really exists when they can hear each other. That's a small production detail with an enormous effect, and it's one of the quiet costs of a show running long enough that everyone's diaries stop matching. The film also has Albert Brooks in it as Russ Cargill, the head of the environmental agency, which means the show's best-loved guest performer got the villain in the film. Which was the correct decision, and I'm glad somebody made it. Tom Hanks is in it, playing himself, endorsing a government project, on the grounds that the American government has lost its credibility and is borrowing some of his. That's a 2007 joke that has become, in the intervening years, considerably less of a joke. And here's a fun detail to finish on. There's a moment in the film where the family are in the cinema watching a film based on a television program, and Homer stands up and shouts at the audience for paying to watch something they could see at home for free. They put that in the film, that people had paid to see. That's the show doing what it has always done, which is to make the joke about itself before anybody else can, and to make it slightly better than the joke anyone else would have made. And that brings us back round to the run itself, because the numbers have got strange. On the 11th of October, 1990, 33.6 million people sat down and watched a cartoon about a boy failing a history test. Bart gets an F. Season 2, Episode 1. It remains the highest-rated episode in the show's history. It was at the time the highest-rated program in the entire history of the Fox network. And it beat The Cosby Show, which in 1990 was roughly equivalent to beating Gravity. And the episode itself is not a spectacle. It's Bart, who is not stupid, discovering that he cannot pass, panicking, cheating, failing anyway, and then crying in front of his teacher because he genuinely tried. There's no celebrity guest. There's no gimmick. 33 million people for that. That number is worth holding on to for a second because everything after it is a story about a different kind of television. The premiere the previous December had pulled somewhere in the region of 26 million, which for a new animated series on a network that barely existed was extraordinary. Season 1 was the first Fox series to land in the national top 30. Seasons 2 through 4 were the absolute peak, the merchandising, the shirts, the single, all of it happening at once. Then it declined steadily for 30 years. And I want to be careful here because the decline gets used as a stick and it shouldn't be. Recent seasons averaged somewhere around 2 million live viewers. Season 34 came in under that on linear broadcast. That looks catastrophic next to the earlier figure. It isn't particularly. Broadcast television as a whole has collapsed by the same order of magnitude. A figure like that in the 2020s is a functioning network show. The audience didn't leave the program. The audience left the format because they did go somewhere. FXX took exclusive American cable and digital syndication rights in 2014 and ran a marathon of every episode that had aired to that point, 12 straight days, which people watched in enormous numbers in a way that surprised everyone. Then in November 2019, 30 seasons of the series, with one episode removed, went on to Disney Plus in its initial launch regions on the platform's launch, which changed the arithmetic completely because suddenly the show wasn't competing for a Sunday evening slot. It was permanently available in full to everybody forever. In March 2025, they added an always-on channel, a 24-hour stream of the show running continuously, no scheduling, no choosing, just Springfield on tap. And in December 2025, Disney announced that the show had passed 1 billion hours streamed on the platform in a single year. 1 billion hours in 12 months on one service. That is where the ratings went, and it's also, I suspect, the answer to why videos like this one exist. An enormous number of people are not watching the show, they're leaving it on. But talking a bit about the eras, because we should, and I'm going to do it without ranking anything. Seasons 1 to 8 are what people mean by classic. The show finds its emotional core in Season 2, sharpens its comedy in Season 3, hits its most cited peak around Season 4 with the monorail episode, and Mr. Plow goes surreal under David Merkin in Season 5 with Homer in space, and Cape Fear gets ambitious in Season 6, goes character-driven under Oakley and Weinstein in Season 7, and closes with Season 8's run of high-concept experiments including Frank Grimes and Hank Scorpio. Seasons 9 to 12 are the transition, largely under Mike Scully. This is where the principal and the pauper argument happens, where Phil Hartman dies and two beloved characters go with him, where Maude is killed off, and where the complaint that everyone knows arrives, that Homer becomes reckless and cartoonish rather than foolish and human. That characterization has a nickname in the fandom that I'll leave alone, but the underlying observation is fair enough, and Season 12's Crayon episode was in part the show's own attempt to explain it. Seasons 13 to 32 are the long Al Jean stretch, which is the majority of the show by episode count. It's the least discussed and most consistently produced period. It contains the switch to digital, the switch to HD, the 2007 film, the milestone episodes, the Smithers episode, the Lego episode, and several hundred perfectly decent half hours that nobody argues about in either direction. And from Season 33 onward, with Matt Selman taking a greater share of the show running, there's been a noticeable shift toward experiment, the crime drama, the musical, the fourth wall episodes, the noir. Whether you call that a renaissance or a very long show finding new ways to keep itself interested probably depends on your temperament. The milestones quickly because they're a nice ladder. The 200th was Trash of the Titans in Season 9, in which Homer becomes sanitation commissioner and destroys the town. The 300th was Barding Over in Season 14. The 400th satirized news media. The 500th, At Long Last Leave in Season 23, has the town formally exile the family. The 600th came in Season 28, which also produced the show's first hour-long episode. The 700th was Manger Things in Season 32. And the 800th, Guess Who's Coming to Skinner, came in Season 37, an episode in which Skinner fosters a child and which, in a very nice piece of circularity, name checks a load of Portland street names. The records are the sort of thing that stops meaning much after a while, but for completeness. Longest running American primetime animated series. Longest running American sitcom by episode count. Longest running American scripted primetime series by both seasons and episodes. Most guest stars in a television series, which Guinness had at 810 as of April 2020, and which is comfortably higher now. Most Emmys for an animated series. It passed Gunsmoke on seasons in 2009 and on episodes in 2018, which were the last two records anyone was actually keeping an eye on. I'll be honest, records like that stop landing after a while. Longest running anything is a fact about a spreadsheet rather than a fact about a program. The one that does still get me is the guest star number, because every single one of those is a person who took an afternoon off to go and stand in a booth and be silly for a cartoon. And 800 odd people have now done that. That's not a record, that's a very long queue of people who wanted in. Now, the film. We've been through the film already, so I won't go over the numbers again. What matters here is the timing. It landed between seasons 18 and 19 in the middle of the stretch where most of the loud voices had stopped watching. And it did well enough to embarrass all of them. It's a decent film. The plot is Homer poisoning the town's water supply with pig waste and the government sealing Springfield under a glass dome. Spider Pig is in it. The dome idea was, incidentally, developed independently and slightly before a rather well-known novel used a similar premise, which caused a certain amount of awkwardness at the time. And then nothing for 18 years. There were attempts, ideas got kicked around. Al Jean has mentioned various false starts over the years, including one that would have been a weird Al-adjacent concept. And there was a long period where a sequel was permanently rumored and never scheduled. Then, on the 29th of September, 2025, 20th Century Studios posted a poster, a pink donut with sprinkles arranged into a number 2, drawn by Groening, and the line, "Homer's coming back for seconds." The date given was the 23rd of July, 2027. It's since been moved to the 3rd of September, 2027, Labor Day weekend in America, reportedly to avoid a collision with a Minecraft sequel, which is a very 2027 sentence. That release lands almost exactly 20 years after the first film. And the show itself is not slowing down. It's been renewed through season 40 in a deal announced in April 2025 that takes it to around 2029. Season 37 ran across 2025 and 2026. Season 38 has been confirmed for a premiere on Sunday, the 27th of September 2026 on Fox. The structure going forward is 15 broadcast episodes plus 2 Disney Plus exclusives per season, which is a slightly odd arrangement that reflects exactly where the money now comes from. Since we're on the topic of everything else, the thing has spawned a quick tour, and then I'll stop. The video games run from the Konami arcade beat-em-up in 1991, which was genuinely excellent and swallowed an enormous amount of pocket money, through the notoriously punishing Bart versus the Space Mutants on the NES, to Road Rage, to Hit and Run in 2003, which is the one people still want remastered and ask about constantly, and which remains stubbornly unremastered. Tapped Out, the mobile city builder, ran from 2012 all the way to 2025 and made a genuinely startling amount of money. And in 2025, there was a full Fortnite season with an animated short and a playable Springfield Island, which is where we are now culturally, and I've made my peace with it. The comics were published by Bongo, which Groening co-founded, from 1993 to 2018, 245 issues of the main line, plus Bartman, plus Radioactive Man, plus the annual Treehouse of Horror books. There's a theme park land at Universal in Florida and Hollywood, opened in Florida in 2013 and in Hollywood in 2015, with a working Krusty Burger and a Moe's and a Lard Lad, which means you can buy a real donut from a fictional shop. And there are the shorts on Disney Plus, the Star Wars ones, the Marvel one, the Billie Eilish one, plus the 2 Oscar-adjacent theatrical shorts we covered. The question everyone eventually asks, so I'll answer it once and then leave it alone. Should it have ended? My honest position is no, and I'll tell you why. The argument for ending is that the show would have a cleaner legacy. And I understand it, but a cleaner legacy is a thing for other people to admire, and it cost you all the episodes that would otherwise have existed. There are people whose favorite episode is from season 31. There are children who found it last year. There's a version of this where the show stopped in 1998 and became a respected artifact. And in that version, thousands of hours of work never happened, and a lot of people never had the thing at all. It didn't have to stay good to stay worth having. Those are different requirements, and if I'm being completely honest, I'd rather it was still on. I'd rather it was still going out on a Sunday, still slightly worse than it was, still there. Here's one I've been saving, not for effect, just because it didn't fit anywhere else. The sailboat painting above the sofa, the one that's always slightly crooked. It's been there since around season 2, hanging at the same angle, in the background of thousands of scenes, and nobody in that house has ever straightened it. Not once, not in 36 years. I don't think that means anything. I just like knowing it. And there's a lot left over. We haven't touched the guest stars, and there are more than 800 of them, including people who came in and did one line, and people who did something genuinely strange. We've barely scratched the treehouse segments, which could be their own several hours. There's the whole crusty apparatus, and the games, and the comics, and the enormous business of what the show did to the music industry for about 18 months in 1990. Those might be other videos, probably will be, eventually. For now, most of you listening are asleep, which is the intended outcome and not a complaint. The house is still there. The dad still comes home from work. The dog is still under the table. Somebody in that living room is going to sit down on that sofa next Sunday under a crooked painting of a boat, and none of them will be any older than they were.